First item is the adoption of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Kolkoff, seconded by Councillor Murray. Thank you. Discussion?
If we could have it as amended with the additional input letters that we received prior to the start of the meeting. Yep. And we just received another one that we don't have on the adjustment. So we can
And are we going to get copies of that?
I can go and do that, yes. And that was so the list of names is D. Scott, Dr. Montgomery McLean, B. Stewart, A. Corvette Crossum, I. Savage, J. and C. Hallowell, M. Pierce, and F. Lake, and we're adding N. B. Blood.
Okay. So move and second all right with the addition of that correspondence for the public hearing one items?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Any declaration of conflict? Hearing none. Item 4A, District Municipal Zoning Bylaw number 60, 2005, Amendment Bylaw number 60.35, 2017. Good evening. I declare this public hearing open, convened pursuant to Section 890 of the Local Government Act to allow the public to make representations to Council respecting matters contained in the proposed District Municipal Zoning Bylaw number 60, 2005, Amendment, bracket 7143 Caillet Road, Bylaw number 60.35, 2017. Councillors present tonight include Councillors John Colson, Councillor Bob Kolkoff, Councillor Will Geselbrecht, Councillor Denise Hain, Councillor Don Murray, and Councillor Mark Swain, myself, Mayor Colin Hain. At this point, I'll turn it over to our planner, Mr. Limshoe, with respect to the details of the amendment bylaw.
Thank you, Your Worship. The function of Council at this hearing is to listen to all views of the public. Members of Council may ask questions of you following your presentation for clarification purposes. It is not the function of Council members at this public hearing to state their position or debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with individual citizens. Council debate on the proposed bylaw will take place when the bylaw is presented for third reading. The purpose of this hearing is to provide all persons who believe their interest in property is affected by the proposed bylaw with a reasonable opportunity to be heard or present written submissions only respecting matters contained in the bylaw that is the subject of this hearing. The Mayor will ask for comments from the gallery 3 times before the hearing closes. Each person wishing to speak about the proposed bylaw shall raise their hand to be given an opportunity to speak. Speakers are encouraged to limit their remarks to 5 minutes. Anyone wishing to speak again will be permitted only after all speakers are heard. This is to allow everyone an opportunity to address the hearing. After you raise your hand, the Mayor will invite you up to the podium to speak. Please press the button to turn the microphone on and begin your comments by clearly stating your name, civic address, and whether you are speaking on your own behalf or for a client, company, or group of citizens. All comments must be directed to the Chair, the Mayor, and may only relate to the subject of the bylaw. You may not debate the point of view expressed by other speakers or direct questions to other speakers, Council, or staff. General discussion among those present is not allowed. If necessary, only the Chair may ask staff for clarification on any technical points. For those in the gallery, we would ask that you refrain from applause or other expression directed at any individual as a result of comments made by the speaker, whether they're speaking in favor or opposed to the application. We do not want anyone to be discouraged from speaking. After the close of the public hearing, Council may not receive any further information from the applicant or members of the public. Council may receive further information from staff for clarification only. As an introduction to the proposed zoning bylaw 60, 2005 Amendment 7143 Caillet Road, bylaw number 60.35, 2007, I'd like to provide the following overview. Bylaw number 60.35 was given first and second reading May 8, 2007. A public hearing was held June 12, 2007. Second reading was received and given second reading on July 10th was amended. A notice of next public hearing was advertised in July 18th with limited editions of the 9 municipal buildings and delivered to owners, tenants, and property located within 120 meters of 7143 Caillet Road. Before the agenda was distributed, 3 submissions were received and included in the agenda. They were from K&M, Montanero, Brian Dempsey, Graham Savage, all in favor of the bylaw. Since the agenda was distributed, we received 8 letters. 3 in support from D. Scott, Doctors Montgomery and McElwain, and Sarah Bolden. 5 opposed: B. Stewart, I. Savage, A. Corvin, Corson, J.N.C. Halliwell, and Mike Pierce. I'm sorry. And last but not least, Mr. Blood. Council, as requested by the property owner, is considering amending District of Mansfield zoning bylaw number 60, 2005 through the adoption of bylaw number 60.35. An information binder with background information was available for public inspection at the office and during this hearing at the entrance to the meeting. Bylaw number 60.35, if adopted, would amend the District of Mansfield zoning bylaw number 60, 2005 by rezoning the property legally described as Lot 2, District Lot 27G, formerly known as District Lot 27, Wellington District, Plan 36633, and located at 7143 Caillet Road, to be rezoned from Commercial 1 under Subdivision District L to Commercial 8 under Subdivision District L, to permit a mix of commercial and residential uses. The applicant has indicated that if the zoning amendment bylaw were to be approved, they would subsequently apply for a development permit to redevelop the property to accommodate the expansion of the existing business, plus accommodate additional commercial and residential space on the property. So as noted previously, the property is currently zoned as Commercial 1. Under this zoning, the applicant is permitted to expand the commercial enterprise on the site. The Commercial 8 zone is a new zone, and the big difference between the 2 zones is the fact that under the proposed Commercial 8 zone, the applicants will be allowed to provide for multiple residential units on the property. At the public hearing, there were 3 main issues raised. The possibility for the site to develop with residential units and no commercial, possible increase in traffic associated with the residential units, and the number of residential units that could be built on the property. Since the last public hearing, staff has worked with the applicant and has amended the bylaw to provide the following 2 provisions: to limit the number of residential units to 10, and to require that at least 40% of the total building area is used for commercial use. The last points I'd like to make for clarification, as I know that there's been some concerns raised, is in regards to the proposed or the allowed building height. Under the proposed zoning, the maximum height will be limited to 2 stories only. This is certainly in keeping with the existing community plan designation, commercial village core. The other issue that I want to clarify as well is in regards to setback. The proposed zoning requires a setback of 5 meters from the property line. So there were images floating around, and I've received some emails about possibly buildings being pushed up right to the road. Under the proposed zoning, that would not happen unless the applicants came forward for a variance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next order of business, would the applicant like to speak to the application this evening? If you could come up to the microphone there and turn it on until the green light comes on. Oh, going off.
Thank you, Council. My name is Dave Frinton. My wife and I, Shelley, own Dash Developments, which owns the land which Cruise Plus, which is our other business, operates. When we moved to Nanaimo in 1999, we had 1 employee. After 17 years now in Lanceville, Cruise Plus has grown to 37 salaried staff members who work in this town. We're one of Canada's largest and most reputable travel agencies, and we're still growing. In 2018, we celebrate 20 years of business. We want to grow in Lanceville. Our main office is maxed out and it's very tired. And without a massive infusion of cash to improve, which we've been advised on numerous occasions not to do, that would be a waste of money, our shelf life is getting closer, very close to expiration. In order to hire a couple more people right now, we have to actually just share. So it's not working out for us. We need a bigger and better home. We want to stay in Lanceville. And we're obviously hoping the economics work to utilize the land we purchased many years ago. Having the option to subsidize the new office with residential makes sense and falls into the accepted uses of the OCP. As we all know, Lanceville has currently has quite a bit of vacancy in the retail business. We're having a hard time building it or filling it, and we do not want to add more just commercial space. The finances just don't work. We work here, we want to play here, and we wish to contribute to the healthy village core. We believe that the intentions we have put forth are in the best interest of the community, as well as fit in the official community plan. You know, we're looking for an answer. We want a decisive answer from you folks, to be honest with you. Does Lanceville want to be open for business, or should we just be honest and send a message to us and everybody else that you don't want to be? And then we know where we stand. Our property is small, but it can be a very positive statement that with a resounding yes, and with tasteful modernization, it's a good idea, and will contribute to a better place in Lanceville to live and work. We urge you to give us all definitive direction tonight, and let Cruise Plus, which is one of Lanceville's largest employers and brings economic benefit to others here, to stay here, to build here, and have Lanceville see the beginning of some long-needed revitalization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time I'd like to call for first-time persons present who believe their interest in property is affected by the proposed bylaw to raise their hand, wait to be recognized, state their full name and address at the podium, and whether they're speaking on their own behalf for a client, company, or group of citizens. So any individuals that like to speak for the first time? It's okay, come on up to the microphone
Does it
there.
have to be that your property is directly affected, or just that you live in Lanceville?
Well, do you believe you're affected by the development that could occur?
Yes.
There you go. So if you could state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, I'm Liz Higgins, and I live at 7122 Dickinson Road. And I'm in favour of the proposal. I think it's very positive for two reasons, really. One, as Dave just mentioned, it seems to me that it fits perfectly into the OCP. Certainly based on the survey that we all got several months ago, which I understand those that were returned, most people were in favour of. This development or this proposal seems to be a perfect match for what was proposed for the model for the village core. Secondly, I think if we're going to have businesses in Lanceville, Cruise Plus is the kind of business that we want to keep and we want to encourage. They're not polluters, they're not noisy, they have tradition in the village. They've been here for a long time, they're not new people that we don't know. I personally have known Dave and Shelley for over 10 years. I know that they are sound and good business owners, good employers. I also know that they care about people, they care about the environment, and they care about this community. And I find it really hard to imagine that they would ever try and develop anything that was detrimental to this village. Also, Cruise Plus is good for this village. It's a very, very successful business. I think there's many people in Lanceville that don't realise what a success story they have in their midst with Cruise Plus. It's very successful. Oh, and did I mention I actually work at Cruise Plus? So since I worked there, I started there in 2006, it's grown tremendously. And as Dave was saying there, I think we have, at least more than 30 people now working in Lanceville in the two offices. Some of us live in Lanceville, some of us don't. But the ones that don't, they come into Lanceville every single day and they use and they support the other businesses in the area. They use the drugstore, they use the dentist, they get takeout from the pub all the time. Many of them use the hairdresser that was down on Dickinson Road. The office itself, we have lots of in-house functions. And we always give the business to the local caterer, the catering business, or the restaurant. All of these things are a benefit to Mansfield, and I can't help thinking that this proposal will just enhance those benefits. So I really don't see a downside to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other individuals that would like to speak for the first time? Yep. If you could approach the microphone, please. Name and address.
Hi, my name is Maureen DeWitt. I reside at 7135 Dickinson Road. My property is one of the ones that is affected by the application. In speaking with some of the neighbors that couldn't be here tonight, we haven't seen actual drawings of any sort of drawings of what might be proposed. There is definitely concern about parking. We've heard the number 10 units tossed around, 10 housing units, which in some cases can mean, it could mean 20 cars. Most households have 2 vehicles, plus employees, plus the residents, and people who are using the businesses. We are very concerned about parking. And the other thing that was mentioned was concern about the trees. There's some lovely old trees there. Are they going to denude the property of trees? It's one thing that Mansfield is noted for, and they seem to be coming down in everyone's neighborhood fast and furious, so that everyone can get a little sneak peek of the ocean. We have wonderful wildlife next to our property. Our property is next to a creek. I don't know if the creek runs by the Caillet property in question. I think it runs under the road and then catches up on the property across the street and then goes down by our property. That is something that's very important to us, very important to the wildlife. So we would like to know how these things will be affected. We're not saying poo-poo, but we want more information. Is this going to look like something from Nanaimo that maybe we don't want? We just like more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hallowell, I believe you raised your hand earlier.
John Hallowell, 7186 Landcrest Terrace. I would like to address the issue of 7143 Caillet Road. I have no objection to the manner in which this company is performed in our village, and there have never been any complaints about it to my best of my knowledge. However, I would like to draw your attention to the effects if this bill is passed as it's in the third reading this evening, what the effects will be on the future of our community. And will it open a can of worms? Will it be restricted to this address? Because the effects of this, with regards to development of a property, I'm sure that there are those other people, residents in our community and developers who are eager to find out what you're going to pass tonight and whether you allow these multiple dwellings to be on this piece of land. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the effects would be infringing onto our OCP, as they would directly affect our OCP. When we started out as a municipality, we did, not as a community in Lansville and taxpayers, want subdivisions in our village like those that you can see are in place in Nanaimo bordering our municipality. This would be the start of something like that I don't know that we could ever stop once you cross that line. We wanted a rural, semi-rural village by the sea feel alongside agriculture. We wanted a village with lot sizes accommodating all of our population, including small lots, 1/4 acre, 1 acre, 5 acres and others. We wanted the village core to look and feel like a village. If you pass this bill, then this could be the start of this village losing that village feel in the future. We did not, and I repeat, did not want buildings above 2 stories in our original OCP, and we are still of the same opinion that no buildings above 2 stories should be in the village core. My observations are we never fulfilled the requirements of the original OCP, and who on earth saw the need for a reviewed OCP, and who could justify the time and money required at taxpayers' expense to go ahead with a review? It appears that the OCP review was solely driven to address development, and who was driving the exercise for an OCP review? Who do they represent? What is their motive? Where do they live? Who gains financially if this goes ahead? Who loses financially if this goes ahead? And why are we pushing for this now? I will remind you to listen to who you represent, the taxpaying residents of Lantsville, and not those that are motivated by financial gain or self-interest at the expense of our taxpaying residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional individuals, if you could come up to the microphone, please. Name and address first, please.
My name's Jan Moles, and I live at 7029 Dickinson Road.
I'm sorry, I missed the last name.
Moles. Moles.
Thank you. And your address?
7029 Dickinson Road.
Thank you.
My property is not adjacent to the property, so I'm not affected in that respect. But I felt impelled to get up and speak because I really like the idea of the OCP. I like the idea of having a village core which is vibrant and which has mixed use. I like the idea of having 2-story buildings which are a mixture of work and residences. Sometimes it's very nice to have residences actually in a village core. I've lived in so many places where every single person that's in the centre of the town or village has gone, and they all live in the suburbs, and the centre is completely empty at night. So from my own personal point of view, I think that this seems to fit in with the use that the OCP are saying that they want, and I would really like that. I also remark that I feel quite proud to be able to say that in Lantsville there's some successful businesses, and there are several, and I'm very pleased to have them here. So I would like to encourage that this should happen, and so therefore I approve of the change. I think that the business in question has done lots of good in Lantsville, has helped other people, has helped the businesses, and I do not really believe, although obviously I can't know, that they've got an axe to grind apart from improving their business. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional speakers. Sir.
My name is Andrew Hawkins. I live at 7485 Ferdinand Road. I'm in favor of the redevelopment. I've lived in several different places in my life, big cities, small towns, little villages, now Lantsville. My family and I like to call it home. And as I look around downtown, I see there's a lot of failing business. And it's been my experience that failure of downtown businesses can be directly attributed to a lack of people living in the downtown core. So I think adding a residential component to the bill will bring more shoppers, more people that want to be in the downtown core and use the existing services. We have Mechanic reopening now. There's a new business going into the failed Lantsville market, and we'd like to see more businesses support from more local residents. So, my opinion, I think, to not allow for Lantsville to expand into the future with new development, bringing new people to the downtown core, and revitalizing the downtown core, I think we're going to lose track of where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional speakers for the first time. Mr. Pierce.
My name's Mike Pierce. I live on 7032 Leland Road in Lanceville. And I actually think we've got some great businesses here in Lanceville, and I really want that to continue. The business in question, I don't know them, but everything I've heard about them, they're very reputable. I don't have a problem with the application in itself. I have a problem with the amendment that's coming forth, and it's just too wide open for me to be comfortable with. I believe it shouldn't be part of an amendment process, but that of OCP process. The one we have in question is one I support. However, whatever comes down the pike, whatever we end up with is the one I would respect and adhere to. But the following is how I see it. The bylaw departs from the current bylaws. It will reduce the required commercial footprint to only 40%, increase residential units tenfold. The setbacks are reduced to 5 meters from 8, and if an adjoining commercial space is present, the side lot distance can be 0. To me, this means increased density, which I'm not in favor of all that much. I understand there needs to be some increased residents in the village to make it viable, so be it. However, I find that the way the bylaw is reading, it'll take us down a path that I think will take us to a type of village core that will end up looking like most humdrum downtowns in North America. I believe that most Lanceville residents don't want this, and instead would prefer the direction of the planning that is suggested in the following village core improvement update that was written June 2014 from a District of Lanceville Community Update. Given that our seaside location is one of the defining features and main attractions, the committee also supports incorporation of subtle design elements that build the connection between the seashore and the village core. I don't believe that the proposed bylaw would allow this to happen unless it's regulated. So I would like to ask this proposed bylaw be tabled to be considered as part of an overall OCP plan. Hopefully in this process, the village core is developed as part of an overall community process that will be hopefully in tune with the spirit of our community, which makes it unique. I'd also like to say that Lanceville has a unique opportunity here to do something really cool with our village core. Not that that's a very sophisticated term, but that's what I believe in. That would be the envy of communities nearby. Let's depart from standardization with everybody else and put our community, our council, and planning staff on the map. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional speakers for the first time. If you could come up to the microphone, please.
Hilda Higgs, 7048 Dickinson Road. And I'm just here to say, for 30 years I've been going to official community plans, and it seems no one listens. We all agree what we want. I understand this is a good business. I'd like to see it stay, but I'd also like to see all our time and efforts being listened to, that when we have an official community plan, we follow it. And as soon as you break it for someone, you break it for everyone. And I just don't want to see that happen. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see the two-story. Everyone has always said, any plan I've been at for 30 years, any table I've sat at, everyone agreed we don't want higher than two-story. I always thought it would be great if someone wants to live over their business, and that to me makes a lot of sense. Every business downstairs, you live upstairs. And condos, not many, no, it just doesn't fit in with the plan. And I just feel that why do we go to these endless meetings if no one's listening? Thank you.
Thank you. Additional speaker for the first time. Sir.
Jack Roberts, 7084 Caillet. Wow, big slam of density. I just have to make a few comments that I already live in the village core. I'm down the block. I'm part of the village core. I see from what I've read on the website and so on that the majority of the input of people supporting this plan are outside of the direct influence of it. There have been over 40 people directly in the shadow of this development that have signed petitions against it. We are people living in the shadow of it, right in the epicenter of the development. There are people outside of it that are very much in favor of it, that are protected and insulated by distance and by property. The implementation of this plan will set a template, which I'm not sure that we want to follow for the rest of the village core as such. Looks to me more and more like a bit more of a strip mall development along here. We already have a lot of vacant places. How many more are we going to add to it? If you go up and down the road, now the way it sits, you can often count 20 to 25 cars parked in the parking lot and around the business. Add another 20 cars for the condos, and all of a sudden you're up to, well, I'd say easily 35 or 40 cars right there. I'm not quite sure how all that's going to be taken into account as far as with our charming village idea. So thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words about this.
Thank you. Additional speakers. Sir. Mr. Levitt, come up to the microphone, please.
My name is Brian Blood. I live really well positioned. I live at 7075 Caillet Road. This bylaw really represents an end run around the OCP. There are a number of fault lines running through this district. Most involve disparate approaches to land use. Zoning exists largely to confine and separate those disparate land uses. When confusion exists, problems occur. For example, two progressive and respected land uses that we can all get behind: the peaceful enjoyment of residential property and the agricultural production of local food famously came into a conflict that still resonates in the district. No one needs reminding of the political, financial, and legal consequences of that land use confrontation because we're still living with it. The mixing of large numbers of residential units spread among commercial land uses creates a complex set of fault lines between these two disparate land uses. It can work. It works in upmarket, dense neighborhoods of large, sophisticated cities. Will it work here? The middle-class element required for the integration and success of this bylaw is unlikely to be attracted. Would any of you want to live in or invest in a small unit, or even a larger one in the business core? Or have your children live there? There are simply too many unknown factors for council to ensure that this bylaw and its ultimate application to the whole village core will not go very badly indeed for existing residents. It is a guaranteed win-win for only that handful of mostly non-resident commercial property owners. There are other solutions to the problem of too much commercial property and too little commercial activity. I'm not going to go into those now because it'll probably run over my 5 minutes. But there really are, we can go in two directions, really. We can try to compete regionally, and that doesn't seem like, that seems counterintuitive to create yet more commercial property in Lanceville when we already have too much. And to compete regionally, I'm not sure that the residents of Lanceville would really go for that. There's been a lot of sort of commendations for this property owner, but I'd just like to say that he's done very little in all those years to improve existing property and has shown scant concern for the neighborhood. For years, we've had all the cars parked on the street creating dust and puddles and mud. There's all of this vacant, weedy, gravelly land on the property that could have been used for parking. There's never been an attempt to do that. The other thing I'd like to say is that this is a call center. And call centers are notorious in other jurisdictions for racking up very impressive numbers of employees and then using their low overhead portability as leverage to pressure local and regional governments for tax concessions and corporate welfare. They can and often do move to another jurisdiction in a weekend. We've already seen this in Nanaimo. I'm not saying that this property owner is waiting for you to raise his property value in order to cash in and move on, but I'm asking you to concentrate on the long-term effects of this bylaw and not the pretty pictures. I'm sure he is a successful businessman and a swell guy, as touted by the supporters of this bylaw, but this is about land use. Likewise, the comments urging you to support this bylaw because nothing else new has been proposed for a long time. If you buy that logic, then planning has been replaced by desperation or maybe boredom. This bylaw would set a precedent for the entire CBD for many years. If it fails, it will fail very badly indeed, and this historical turning point will have your names on it. Please don't do it. And would a councillor please ask for a recorded vote when we do decide on this? Thank you.
Additional speakers for the first time. Sir.
Hi, I'm Robin Love, 6679 Elm Road. I don't have any direct interest in this. My wife and I were fortunate enough a few years ago to have our immigration application approved to move from Nanaimo to Lanceville. Thank you for voting for us. We've been in this area for 30 years. I have a business downtown Nanaimo, but now we live up on Elm Road. And it's interesting to hear the comments about the village of Lanceville and how I understand how proud people are of this village, but when we have visitors come, we don't take them to the village of Lanceville. There's not much happening here. We take people to downtown Nanaimo. And in the 30 years that I've lived there, it has transformed from a dump to a pretty nice town. A lot of their success has been getting people living in the downtown area. You know, we worry about cars and parking. What happens now? Most people have to drive into the little village. There's not actually very much worth driving to. I think we would love to see a successful little village, and I think one of the key factors is you have to have some people who live near here. This sounds like a pretty good start to me, this mixed commercial, which I know can be very successful in other places. We need to have people living in the downtown area. We need to get the population up to sustain a village. How do you sustain a really good neighborhood coffee shop if only, a few hundred people live within walking distance? Thank you.
Thank you. First time speakers? Okay, hearing no more first time speakers. Oh, wait, are they out there? Name and address, please, Mr. Savage.
Yes, Ian Savage, 7577 Alls Road. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I think it's a good thing for the property owner to be looking into improving his property. And I think it's a good thing the district planner has been helpful in that manner. The problem I have is the precedent this will set with mostly residential, with commercial becoming a second use. This really is setting the template and the precedent for the rest of the village core, the commercial core. If this was a one-off, I would certainly consider helping out with support, but it's not. 40% commercial for 2-story buildings. Does that mean that 3- and 4-story buildings would need a 66 or 75% residential component with 2 or 3 stories of residential above commercial? Not expanding our business footprint, this is shrinking it to 1 floor under predominantly residential on future properties. The Caillet property is 0.784 acres, So with 10 units of residential, that's 12.76 residential units per acre plus commercial. And this is a precedent for a new level of residential density. And this is base density. I'm not aware of any community amenities which are being required. For example, elsewhere increased density, one requires parkland or other community benefits. So perhaps a strip at the front of the Lanceville frontage of this property and future properties might be in order to create a pedestrian walkways. This bylaw that I'm aware of does not require residential units to be above commercial. They can be separate buildings. And the other concern I have is for this precedent of residential street walls, which are simply an unbroken wall of buildings, creating that strip field, very common in other jurisdictions. And this is accomplished by having 0 side setbacks and a standard front setback, which is 5 meters down from the 8 meters in the village core improvement plan. We addressed this specifically with the 8 meter setback. The idea at the permit processing time, it would allow for an undulating setback, so some buildings forward, some back, and this was to create a lot of green space plazas and pedestrian areas as opposed to having a straight wall. And this also reduces space in the heart of the village. I know it's hard to imagine now that one would think we have too much commercial, but if you look at Woodgrove, its expansion went all the way up Metro Drive, so I think it's a good thing to retain space for future expansion of commercial. And the idea of residential above commercial, I think in most people's mind was old Mrs. Potter living above the bakery, you know, out of the Dickens England style of shops. But if in my mind anyway, I never dreamed it would mean basically condominium buildings with commercial on the main floor. That makes it predominantly a residential zone with commercial being a secondary idea. So page 45 of the village improvement plan says storefront should be undulating. A strong street wall is not preferred. Instead, pedestrian building frontages should provide variation and a high quality public realm. It also brought into account design should account for solar exposure to public and private spaces. It just means not to create too much shade, and that's my other worry of a street wall, what that does as well. So the 2005 OCP demonstrates how important it is for an OCP to be specific in its intent. The quaint idea of residential above commercial wasn't quantified in the 2005 OCP, but this policy can really be used to now determine any ratio of residential to commercial. The other factor is commercial industrial properties, which I don't agree with, but they do pay a much higher tax rate than residential, and there will be a loss in commercial taxes with an increased residential component. For example, the land component, how will it be computed? Will it be 40% commercial, 60% residential rate? Having a tourist accommodation is an idea that really hasn't been vetted yet in the OCP process, but with tourist accommodation above, it would solve the problem of conflict of residents with public activities in the village core. especially in the evening, be it festivals or outdoor plazas, that sort of thing. And the other factors, will a street wall of predominantly residential space be a draw for visitors to come to Landsville? It's quite average and typical, so is it really creating a special place for the special setting that we're in? And just to speak to the health of current commercial properties, it's actually not that bad. It's over 95% occupancy. There's only one building now that's empty. And a number of these properties have multiple businesses in them which are somewhat fully occupied now. So with this idea of creating so much residential around the village, the idea is to create more activity in the village, but that's not a proven theory. Many of the current residents that live close to the village currently shop at Woodgrove, so what is to say they would not continue doing that? I personally think that creating a draw, like an experience like Tofino for visitors is the way to go. Tofino has half the population of Landsville, yet is very vibrant commercial. And the reason that relates to this application is the template it will set to create a quite mundane village core is the point. So I'll end by saying there's some things for me to clarify in the new zoning bylaw C8, and that is in future applications for rezoning of Landsville commercial properties, can the existing older buildings count for the 40% commercial component? So existing buildings and then you'll have new residential beside them. Is that a possibility? And the second is the residential density and the commercial ratio flexible and discretionary in future applications? So would a 3-story building in the commercial core be 66% residential? That is 2 floors of residential on top, 1 on the bottom. And the 3 is, does the 10 dwelling unit figure apply to just the Caillet property or to all properties regardless of size? Or would the 12.76 units per acre be applied? So a 4-acre property would be allowed 51 units. These are unanswered questions. So in summary, over the many years, there's been a number of workshops, I can count 4 at least. The last one being the Village Core Improvement Committee, which had an open house with about 90 people discussing the village core and how it would develop and improve. And I never once have heard it address the idea of the ratio of residential to commercial. Which I think is important. Therefore, may I humbly suggest you table this until the OCP process is complete. And we have a prime opportunity this fall with a public meeting slated in September to get feedback on what residents' idea is of a proper residential component, or would they prefer tourist accommodation or some such thing. And I just wanted to reiterate, this is, the template being created by this bylaw. It's absolutely nothing against the specific application. It's just the bylaw created, and what happens on this property will set a precedent for future properties. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Any first-time speakers? Hearing no additional first-time speakers, call for the second time for persons present to speak or present written submissions. Please raise your hand. Mr. Blood. The name and address again for the record, please.
Ryan Blood, 7075 Caillet Road. It was mentioned earlier, and I'm glad it was, Wiles Creek. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Wiles Creek, but Wiles Creek is the drainage for the entire lowlands from Caillet Road all the way through the Needwood Farm, the dog kennel property, behind the whole village. It's quite a large drainage area, and that creek runs into the Strait of Georgia at the foot of Jack's Road. Through its entire course, it's a wild creek above ground. Now, I don't believe it's probably a salmon stream anymore. The only place that it's in a pipe is under roads and through this property. Now, it's not the current property owner that put this creek underground in a pipe diagonally across the property. It was a previous owner, but it was done with no permissions and no engineering. So I think that the district, before that problem falls onto the district and the taxpayers, I think that needs to be looked at as well.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak for either a first time or second time? Just before declaring this hearing closed, I'd like to reiterate that Council cannot entertain further submissions or correspondence from the public nor the applicant on the proposal once the hearing is closed. Should you wish clarification on specific issues regarding the project after this evening, please direct your inquiries to members of staff. So for a third and final time, I call for anyone who wishes to speak or present written submissions with regards to the amendment bylaw. Seeing or hearing none who wish to speak or present additional written submissions, I declare the public hearing for District of Lansville zoning bylaw number 60, 2005 amendments, bracket 7143 Caillet Road, bylaw number 60.35, 2017 closed. Thank you very much for participating. Just note that with regards to it, Council is scheduled to consider third reading of the bylaw on tonight's meeting agenda. Yes. Basically, Councilor Neal is saying we pay for air conditioning. Can we have it, please?
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Felt like old times.
Being a song. Actually, everyone is ready to practice.
Okay. Next up on the agenda, item 5A, Janet Zaleski with regards to Lanark Consultants and the presentation of draft water master plan for the first time for both council and public.
Good evening. I'm very pleased to be here to present the draft water master plan today. I'm going to present today an overview of the plan. There's a lot of information, so I'm going to try to stick to the highlights. With vacations underway, we don't have our full project team here, so one of the things we would like to request that if there are detailed questions and comments, if we could submit them to Mr. Spears in writing. We will bring back responses at a future council meeting. We anticipate that there will be a few that we'll put together. As we all know, water has long been an important topic for Lansville, and I must admit, as we've been going through this process, it's also come to front of mind for me. One of the things that I always expect when I turn on my tap, there's going to be water there to have my coffee and enjoy my shower and all of those wonderful things. And the idea of the water master plan is looking forward into that long term so that all future residents that are connected to community water have that opportunity as well. It provides an opportunity for us to look at the current constraints, understand existing community desires, and recommend directions to manage and enhance the community's water infrastructure in ways that will allow the district to provide water that is affordable for the community, sustainable for the environment, and resilient for the future. The plan provides recommendations for councils to consider as the community evolves over the next 20 years. Like any long-range plan, a water master plan is intended to be a living document that's going to need ongoing monitoring, ongoing reviews, and updates. They're going to be essential as it moves forward. We can't fully predict at this time all of the changes that will happen in Lansville over the next 20 years. But the Water Master Plan can consider what's happening now, what are the considerations that are happening at this time, and look at how the community might evolve so that decisions that are being made today and in the future are going to support a range of potential futures for the community. Let's see if I can get this to work. So in terms of a process, the Water Master Plan has been undertaken concurrently with the OCP update process to consider how potential land use directions could affect future water servicing needs. During the process, there has been a number of opportunities to gain input from the public as a whole, as well as from existing neighborhoods and people living in those neighborhoods that may not have access to community water at this time. And we've heard a range of opinions about community water. There are many people in the community that have adequate private water supplies and they're happy with what they have right now. They're not necessarily interested in community water at this time. We've also heard from others that have identified concerns about their water supplies and they have a strong desire to connect to community water. So the Water Master Plan is an opportunity to consider these opinions and develop potential sequencing and planning so that there are steps in place to consider as the community moves forward. In terms of the existing water supply and distribution system, and the Water Master Plan outlines this, today, as you can see on the plan, all of Lansville's water is provided from the existing well field on Harvey Road. From this source, it is pumped up to the Ware Road Reservoir, and that's where treatment occurs. From Ware Road, the water splits in two directions. Most of the water is distributed to the area shown in green, which is the lower pressure zone, and that services properties that are below the 97.25 meter elevation, essentially many of the properties in Lower Lansville. Some of the water is pumped up to R2, which is the Alt Road Reservoir, which sits at a higher elevation and is distributed to the 226 existing connections in the upper pressure zone, which is the area shown in blue, mostly in the Winchelsea area. The Alt Road Reservoir was built in 1974, so it's nearing the 50-year mark. And previous analysis has shown that that reservoir is likely going to be undersized to effectively support future fire flows, as well as to consider any future expansion. So it's one of those components that is in need for future consideration. The blue outline that runs all the way around shows the full extent of Lansville's water service area as identified in the 2005 OCP. It includes a number of properties, the ones shown in white, that currently aren't connected to community water service. And understanding the level of interest from those areas to have future water connections has been an objective of the Water Master Plan. And the purple area at the south end of the community is the Foothills Development Area. Current planning indicates that the property owners will be responsible for obtaining water for this development from on-site wells. In terms of goals and objectives for the Water Master Plan, there's 4 draft objectives that are considered. The plan looks at options for providing access to safe drinking water for all properties within Lansville's water service area, reducing concerns about wells with inadequate quality or quantity. This means planning to consider potential extension over time to neighborhoods as they need or desire connections. A key goal of the Water Master Plan is to plan for a sustainable future water supply so that water remains available for the community even as the community evolves. This includes continued supply of water during abnormal or emergency conditions, like when it's very dry or it hasn't rained in a month. Also, as well as adequate supply for the long-term future. A cost-effective water system optimizes capacity and maintains the value of the system over time. Water supply and distribution infrastructure is costly. So planning and developing infrastructure now is going to be able to adapt to the community in the future and renew it over time is going to be very important. We want to plan a system that's going to have the right size and right-sided infrastructure so that it can be prepared for many directions that the community might choose to take in the future. And finally, encouraging responsible community water use. We know today that Lansville has some of the lowest per capita water use in the region. Awareness, education, monitoring, and rates all play a role of this, and remaining a low water use community is going to be important for its future. The Water Master Plan discusses a number of components, and the first one is the Water Design Standard. That's Section 4 of the plan. The standard provides guidance on how much water needs to be made available for each connection to the community water system, and this information helps us consider how much water will need to be provided to effectively service all connected properties when water demands are at their peak. The standard that has been used in the past of 3,400 liters per day per connection, or if you divide that by 2.46, which is the estimated number of people living in a Lansville household, that's 1,380 liters per day per person. This has been the standard since prior to incorporation. Since incorporation, the district has established a metering system, and they now have the benefit of valuable data about water demands, making it timely to revisit the standard. As part of the Water Master Plan, Coors & Associates completed a water design standard review to study current water system demands, analyze design standards that are being used throughout other mid-Vancouver Island communities, and recommend an updated standard for moving forward. The design standard report is incorporated into the Water Master Plan, and the standards are used within the Water Master Plan to consider the supply and demand analysis. It is important to note that the primary consideration for a design standard is the maximum day demand per capita, how much water needs to be available for each connection. But the standard also needs to consider cumulative water requirements for elements like non-revenue water, for example, the water used for utility flushing, firefighting practice, and support public space and facilities. It needs to consider leakage, peak hour demands, fire flows, mechanical failures and system maintenance, climate change, and emergencies. Planning for these components helps ensure that a water system remains resilient in a worst-case scenario to help reduce the possibility of a water shortage. Based on analysis and engineering best practices, the Water Master Plan proposes consideration for reducing the standard for single-family residential from 3,400 litres per day per connection to 2,800 to 3,000 litres per day per connection, and adding a new standard for multiple family residences, which is lower at 1,080 to 1,710 litres per day per connection, recognizing that potential multifamily uses would typically have lower water demands because they have less outdoor landscape area. Landfill doesn't currently have multiple family land uses, and therefore there's no data to actually confirm actual water use. The proposed design standard considers standards and data from other communities and assumptions about outdoor water use. The multiple family standard is set intentionally high for planning, and there would be opportunity if those types of land uses were to be developed to consider if that standard would be lower in the future. The last row on the table identifies industrial, commercial, and institutional uses. Water demands for these uses can vary very widely depending on the activities occurring in that use. Given that landfill has a very small number of these uses, it is suggested that requirements for each institutional, commercial, and industrial use be assessed and allocated independently based on proposed use. One of the things that a water design standard often does is look at what other adjacent communities are using for their standards. They often look for adjacent communities who still have similar climatic conditions and population behavior. The Water Master Plan compares the proposed design standard with standards in Nanaimo, Parksville, and Fairlands. Note that the comparison is in litres per day per person rather than litres per day per connection, so that there's a consistency across all of the comparisons. The ranges proposed in the landfill are consistent with those used in other adjacent communities, which is also relevant when considering the Landfill-Nanaimo Water Agreement. And Nanaimo and Parksville currently don't have published multiple family standards, although Fairwinds does. Like all aspects of a Water Master Plan, continuing to collect data and monitor demands to identify trends or changes will be important, and the plan suggests regular reviews and updates to the design standard. Section 5 of the Water Master Plan analyzes existing neighborhoods within the water service area boundary and considers future water service extension to these areas. As we know, about 2/3 of Lanceville's population in the water service area is connected to community water. That's the area shown in blue. The remaining 1/3, separated into 7 neighborhoods shown on this map, do not have community water service at this time. There's the Clark Drive area in the south, which is the purple area. It includes about 160 residential lots, as well as the Aspen Grove School site. There's the Owen Road area on the north side of the highway, which includes approximately 50 residential lots. There's the small green area, which is the Turnmar Road area, that includes 8 existing unserviced lots. And another small area on the north side of the highway is the Ox Road area, which includes 5 unserviced residential lots. The Winds residential area includes approximately 133 residential lots in the area. And just to the south of that is the Winds Estates area, which includes estate residential lots, approximately 56. And then there's the Bayview area at the far end of the site, which includes approximately 49 estate lots on either side of the highway. Initial input showed a split between residents who would like a connection to community water and those who would prefer to remain on private water sources. To help residents in the different unserviced neighborhoods consider their level of support for community water, cost range scenarios were developed, estimated, and refined for developing infrastructure to extend community water to these areas. It is important to recognize that the cost to extend infrastructure is driven partly by location. The length of water distribution pipe that needs to be installed to supply an area with water service is the defining source of cost for the site. Basically, the cost of the water to extend the pipe is then taken and divided between the number of properties that would be sharing the infrastructure extension. So to estimate cost for each of those areas, the engineering team estimated the pipe lengths and those costs divided between the approximate number of existing properties within the area. Typically, when there's more areas, more lots within an area, so if the lots are smaller, the per parcel cost tends to be less because you're splitting it between more units. in areas where the parks must be extended further, or there's larger distances between the neighbors. Larger lots tend to increase the cost of servicing. Estimated costs were developed per parcel per year for a financing period of 20 years to gauge public opinions about extension in each neighborhood. Each neighborhood has 2 or 3 potential scenarios. In option A, community water extension would not be pursued. In option B, community water would be extended with no financial assistance from new development or grants. Essentially, the cost of providing the infrastructure is divided between the number of existing lots in the area. Option C, which only occurred for some neighborhoods where there is adjacent potential for future development, and those are essentially the areas where there's larger lots would have potential to subdivide. In these cases, community water extension could be a condition of that new development, and therefore that would reduce potential costs for the adjacent neighborhoods to have water extended to their areas. Some of the neighborhoods aren't adjacent to existing potential development areas, so they did not include option C. So through the community-wide survey, residents of the unserviced neighborhoods were asked to provide their comment on the options. Starting with area AW Clark Drive. Because this area is adjacent to water infrastructure, distribution infrastructure, and there are a large number of lots in the area, cost to extend water service to this area is lower than some of the other neighborhoods. Estimating shows that if pipes were extended by future development, costs may be reduced by a small amount. Public feedback from this neighborhood suggested that there is potential support for water servicing extension to existing lots in the neighborhood, even in the absence of new development. And you can see that in this small chart here. The top line suggests people that responded to say they would prefer no water extension to this neighborhood. The middle line is those that would prefer water extension even in the absence of new development. And the bottom line shows those that would prefer potentially reduced costs based on new development occurring. And the numbers, which are a little bit hard to read, are 30%, 51%, and 19%. Moving on to the Owen Road area, it's currently more costly to service due to the lengthy extension of pipe required and a smaller number of existing lots to split the infrastructure costs. Future development of the area could potentially reduce costs to existing residents. Feedback from residents suggests there is a split whether community water should be extended to this area or would be supported by this neighborhood or not. There appears to be little support for the higher costs that would occur in the absence of new development, so it may be warranted to consider deferring extension to this neighborhood until a time where costs may be reduced through future development or other needs. The next area is the small Fernmar area, which sits close to the Winchelsea area. It only has 8 existing lots, and that means that the costs to service Fernmar are actually relatively modest because they're adjacent to existing servicing in the Winchelsea area, but it is split by a small number of lots. With only the small number of residents having survey results are unlikely to provide really accurate results, but given the location of the area, short-term consideration for water extension may be warranted with further input from the existing residents. Like the Fernmar Road area, the Ots Road area includes only a few unserviced residential lots. Extending water service to this area is a lot more complicated. It is a significant distance from water main that would need to be provided, and it's split between a very small number of lots, resulting in much higher costs. Given the limitations to currently efficiently service this area, it is recommended to be considered in later phases. The Winds residential area includes approximately 133 lots that have residential land use designation. The challenge to extending servicing to this area is that infrastructure would need to be extended via the rural land between Winchelsea and the Winds, so through this area and through the rural lands in this area, which contributes to a higher overall cost for the distribution infrastructure. However, because there are a number of lots in this area, the cost to split is between more residents, which helps reduce the individual costs. The Winds does include the G property, which if developed would reduce the cost of servicing extension for the existing properties, for bringing water closer to the area. However, opinions about potential development in the area are mixed, and its future is uncertain at this time. Feedback showed that short-term extension of water service to the Winds residential area may warrant consideration, including consideration of how future development could help to reduce costs. The Winds estate area includes approximately 56 larger lots that create the transition between the residential area to the south and the rural areas to the north. The large lots require lengthy distribution infrastructure shared between a limited number of residents, which in turn contributes to higher servicing costs. Feedback suggests that there might not be sufficient support at the current time to pursue servicing extensions to the estates area, but opinions should be reassessed when other phases are complete. Bayview is also an estate residential area with large lots and is the furthest neighborhood in the water service area to which to extend water. The neighborhood is relatively distant from existing water mains, and the large lots mean lengthy infrastructure costs shared between a limited number of residences. Feedback suggests that there likely isn't sufficient support at the current time to pursue servicing extension to Bayview, but opinions could be reassessed once other phases are complete. Based on the input received, the Water Master Plan provides draft phasing to be considered as in terms of extending water service to properties within the water service area. There are 4 key variables that are considered in water phasing. The first is the neighborhood interest, which we just reviewed on the previous slides. The cost to extend water infrastructure will likely be paid by existing residents through establishment of a local area service, which requires support from at least 50% of the neighborhood. Typically, this means extension will be offered in earlier phases to neighborhoods that have demonstrated stronger desire for water service. The physical extension of water service also needs to be considered. Phasing needs to occur in a logical manner, extending from existing water supply to adjacent neighborhoods before extending out to the more distant neighborhoods. This usually means that neighborhoods closer to service areas may have opportunity for earlier connection. Resiliency of private wells is also a consideration. If there are areas that have identified water quality or quantity issues, priority may be to extend to those areas. And finally, future development may play a role in this extension. As a condition of new development, municipal service extension is required if it's not already existing. If new development were to extend infrastructure closer to existing unserviced neighborhoods, costs may be reduced, making the connection more desirable for the existing residents. The draft phasing plan shown considers these factors and outlines potential sequencing for consideration. Phase 1, shown in pink, includes the properties in Clark Drive, Fernmar, and the Winds residential areas where interest in community water has been identified and there are logical sequencing opportunities. Phase 2 includes areas where community support was lower. It is suggested that community opinions in these areas be reassessed after Phase 1 extensions are complete. The plan also identifies development-driven expansion areas where expansion may be considered at the time of development as a condition of new development pending sufficient water supply. As mentioned, the current foothills agreement requires the landowner to provide their own water source. The next section, Section 6 of the Water Master Plan, outlines a preliminary water budget to help clarify what areas could be serviced under different supply scenarios. Communities develop water budgets to consider potential existing and future demands with how much water is and could be available to ensure water supply is sufficient as the community evolves. The formula itself for water budgeting is simple. You take your water supply, how much you have, and subtract your water demand, how much you need to service existing and future connections to obtain your water excess or deficit. For planning purposes, a water excess should always be available. The community would not want to embark on a situation that could result in a water deficit. Of course, actual budget practices are more complicated. Water budgeting is an estimate based on information known today and assumptions about the future. Actual numbers will be influenced by a wide range of variables, including individual landowner decisions to develop or not develop, innovations, technology changes, climate change, and more. It is highly unlikely that the water use in 20 years' time will precisely match the estimate. However, estimates provide an important yardstick for long-term planning and can be updated and refined over the years as information becomes available. A particular complication for water budgeting in Lansville is how potential future water supply may be distributed throughout the community. In many cases, a community water supply may be connected and water from one source can be used throughout the community. However, the Lansville-Nanaimo Water Agreement sets limitations to how Nanaimo water may be used. It specifically outlines that Nanaimo water may only be used to service Lansville's upper pressure zone. Properties within the lower pressure zone must be connected to District of Lansville groundwater. The agreement stipulates supply for up to 436 existing developed properties. 225 of those are the existing Winchelsea neighborhood connections. That leaves 211 potential connections for currently unserviced existing properties in Upper Lansville. The agreement differentiates between allocation of connections to existing and new development, and currently does not allow the new connections to be used to connect existing unserviced properties. A review of the existing properties in the unserviced neighborhoods in Upper Lansville show that there's approximately 441 potential existing connections needed, more than would be available through the existing Lansville-Nanaimo Water Agreement. To help manage this, the Water Master Plan proposes creation of a middle pressure zone. This zone could be serviced by Lanceville groundwater pumped from the Ware Road Reservoir. The result is 3 pressure zones that are shown on the map. The lower pressure zone, in orange, would remain as existing with the top water elevation is 97.25 meters. It would continue to be supplied by the Lanceville groundwater via the Ware Road Reservoir. The upper pressure zone, shown in green, would include all the properties at higher elevations with the exception of the Park Drive area. This area could be serviced by one chamber of a proposed new dual reservoir with a top water elevation of 158 meters, which would replace the function of the existing Olds Road Reservoir and be supplied by water from Nanaimo. So the areas shown in green potentially could be supplied by the Lanceville-Nanaimo Water Agreement. The proposed middle pressure zone, in blue, which would include properties in the Clark Drive area, it could be serviced by another chamber within the dual reservoir, using Lanceville groundwater pumped up from the Ware Road Reservoir, acting very similar to the way the Olds Road Reservoir works today. This solution would mostly address the capacity issue for servicing existing properties within Upper Lanceville and would allow short-term connection for those existing neighborhoods who have identified early interest in water service, including the Clark Drive area, the Winds residential area, and Fermar Road, as well as potentially the Winds estate. There would be a remaining challenge for future water connection to service existing properties including Owen Road and Bayview, which would require either updates to the Lanceville-Nanaimo Water Agreement or physical infrastructure changes. On the supply side of water budgeting, the Water Master Plan assumes that there may be 3 potential future water sources that could be considered. The first is the existing groundwater source, which with recent upgrades is estimated to be able to supply approximately 31 cubic meters of water per day, pending further testing during the driest weather. The second is the potential supply through the Lanceville-Nanaimo Water Agreement. If the agreement were commenced, the water would become available to service up to 436 existing properties for a total of 1,265 cubic meters per day. The agreement also stipulates that supply could be made available for 50 new development connections in Upper Lanceville, which would provide an additional 145 cubic meters per year, or up to 2,900 cubic meters over a 20-year period. Implementation of the agreement would actually more than double Lanceville's water supply. The final potential supply would be a new groundwater or other supply option that has yet to be identified. As you'll see in the supply scenarios, even with the existing groundwater supply and the Lanceville-Nanaimo Water Agreement, additional supply may be required to achieve potential build-out of the OCP and look beyond a 20-year horizon. On the water budgeting side, so how much water potentially could be required, the Water Master Plan considers both potential connections to existing unserviced parcels, as well as potential growth through infill and development of new parcels. Predicting future populations for water budgeting is a very uncertain science. The key is selecting a possible prediction based on current land use planning and a 20-year horizon, then monitoring and updating the budgets to reflect variables like changes to the well field or aquifer performance, climate change, water conservation behaviors of Lanceville residents, current and future desire for community water extension to existing unserviced neighborhoods, provision of community water for new development in consideration of the amount of formal land use in new development areas, individual landowner decisions, and decisions about potential additional water supply. Water budgeting is intentionally conservative. It is based on a design standard and higher ranges of potential growth considered in the OCP. The intent is to understand if and how maximum demands for a 20-year period may be met and help plan a water supply system that accommodate a range of actual scenarios within that period and beyond. It looks at the long-term big picture and is important to recognize that decisions about water supply improvements or additions or extensions of community water service will be made on a case-by-case basis as the community evolves. Ultimately, water budgeting is to understand what may or may not be possible into the future. The Water Master Plan considers 3 general scenarios based on potential water supply. Scenario A focuses on how much servicing could be extended using the existing well field source. In summary, with the recent upgrades to the existing well field, all of the 885 connections currently existing would be retained. Connections to some of the existing unserviced properties would be available, but there would not be enough supply to service all the existing neighborhoods in the water service area. Based on community input and the existing supply locations, the likely candidates for water servicing extension would be Clark Drive and Fermar Road. But there likely wouldn't be enough supply to extend further servicing to the Winds or to other neighborhoods that may identify desire for servicing in the future. No new growth could be supported, except some minor infill within areas that have existing water and sewer service. The B scenarios consider potential supply, what would happen if both the existing well field with its current rating source as well as potential implementation of the Lansville-Nanaimo water agreement were considered. B1 prioritizes extension of water service to all existing parcels in the water service area, regardless of whether or not the neighborhood has indicated support for water service extension at this time. Through this approach, connections would potentially be available for all the existing connections, all existing parcels in the 7 unserviced neighborhoods, minor infill, all potential new growth in the upper pressure zone, phased at 50 connections per year. Under the water agreement, the supply would be available. The supply available with service new connections within the 20-year time frame would actually exceed the potential growth in those areas. However, Lansville's limited groundwater supply would not have the capacity to service all potential new growth in the lower pressure, middle pressure zones over the long term, including limitations to potential growth in the village. There may be enough capacity to accommodate about half of potential growth in the area, and there would be limitations for potential growth in the Clark Drive, Ware Road area in the long term. B2 uses the same supplies, but looks at a slightly different allocation of the same water. Through this approach, connections could potentially be made available for all existing connections. Existing parcels in the unserviced areas that have indicated a likely desire for connection in the 20-year time frame, including Clark Drive, Fernmar, Wynn's residential area, as well as potential connection for the Wynn's estate area. Supply for Owen Road, Ops Road, and Bayview existing neighborhoods may not be available within the time frame of the plan. There would be availability for minor infill, and like B1, all potential new growth in the upper pressure zone could be accommodated due to the water agreement. Some additional connections in the village area may be available, potentially servicing up to 75% of potential growth in that area, but limitations would remain for full build-out as well as potential growth in the Clark Drive, Ware Road area. There could be a variety of combinations for how to allocate the water under the existing well field in the Nanaimo-Lansville water agreement. And ultimately, what this is indicating is there likely would be some long-term decisions about how that water would be allocated into the future. The C scenario looks at what might be needed to service all the existing and potential future growth throughout the district in the long term over 20 years. Ultimately, this would require identification of an additional supply of about 500 to 1,000 cubic meters more of water. It was an activity, right now that water supply doesn't exist, but it was to understand that if everything happened as outlined in the future 20-year period of the OCP plan, that's the amount of water that would need to be allocated. So in summary, scenario A utilizes the existing well field only and would supply some additional unserviced existing parcels, but not all, and would not allow for new growth. Scenario C, at the other end of the spectrum, would provide a water budget for all existing and potential growth over the 20-year time frame, but would require identification of an additional water source. Scenarios B1 and B2 consider the trade-offs for accommodating extension of water to existing neighborhoods and or to support some potential new growth, but may not have sufficient supply from the existing groundwater and water agreement to fully supply all potential future connections over a 20-year period. The water budget is ultimately an adaptive management tool that helps consider trade-offs and potential based on a combination of known information and assumptions about the future. It should be expected that the scenarios will continue to be reviewed and updated on an ongoing basis to respond to actual changes in the community. The Water Master Plan touches briefly on water conservation. Many communities these days are pursuing a demand reduction approach that encourages reduced water demand by individual consumers. Today, Lansville water users are already among the lowest per capita water consumers on mid-Vancouver Island. This low water use attitude is likely attributable to the awareness about the limited groundwater supply, the universal metering system, the tiered rate structure, education and incentives, and water restrictions. There's already a lot being done in Lansville to conserve water, and it's working. Maintaining this water-conscious attitude will continue to be important as Lansville's community water system evolves, especially as new water users potentially come online. To help accomplish this, the Water Master Plan recommends maintaining the existing tiered rate structure and completing regular reviews and updates. Public input suggested strong support for requiring all new development to incorporate water-saving approaches and technologies. Opportunities to continue to develop or partner on educational materials and support the rainwater harvesting and other innovations. that come up in the region. And one potential innovation that was identified through the process was a septic storage conversion program. In septic conversion, residents make use of existing storage space after community sewer has rendered a private septic tank obsolete. The tank would be cleaned and repurposed as a rainwater capture system that could be used for outdoor, non-potable uses during the dry months. Programs have been undertaken in other communities, and research could be completed to determine if this is a viable potential for Landsville's future. Ultimately, like all other components of Landsville's water system, conservation needs to be carefully monitored to flag and address negative trends in increasing per capita water use in order to ensure that water demands remain low in the community. And finally, the last section of the Water Master Plan identifies potential capital improvements to be considered. The Water Master Plan looks ahead to determine what expansion and capacity might be needed to meet future water demands, as well as what aging components might need to be replaced. A water supply and distribution system is comprised of several components, including large infrastructure that can last well beyond 50 years. Given the long lifespan of these components, it is important to plan early to develop a system that meets current, but also potential future needs of the community, ensuring that components are correctly sited and sized to accommodate a wide range of potential future scenarios. Based on analysis of the existing system limitations and potential future needs, the Water Master Plan recommends capital planning improvements for the next 20 years. The first section, number 1, talks about water supply capacity improvements. And these include projects that will help potentially improve water sources and increase water supply. Projects that may warrant consideration include reconnection of well number 5 in the existing well field to increase capacity, securing groundwater licenses for wells to meet the requirements of the new Water Sustainability Act, consideration of implementation of the Landsville-Nanaimo Water Agreement, which would include payment of the required connection fees, and pursuing an identification of a new groundwater source. The water budget models previously shown suggest there may be long-term insufficient water supply to meet long-term potential growth needs. Identifying future groundwater sources would increase the resilience of the system and should be considered as part of future development negotiations. Number 2, system storage improvements are focused on one major project, which would be the development of a new dual reservoir. This reservoir would replace the function of the Alt Road Reservoir, which is aging and undersized for both existing and potential future storage volume requirements. A new reservoir at a higher elevation would provide a top water elevation that would allow potential effective servicing of all properties within the water service area. And the proposed reservoir is recommended to be a 2-cell reservoir that could allow for separation of storage between water from Nanaimo to service the upper pressure zone and Landsville groundwater to be used in the middle pressure zone if needed. The plan also brings forward several items that have been identified in previous system analysis to improve fire flows in commercial, institutional, and industrial areas, as well as in residential areas. These improvements are targeted at improving firefighting capabilities and improve the replacement of undersized water mains to increase capacity. Several of these projects also support the current asbestos cement main replacement program shown in item 5.1, which includes the ongoing replacement of outdated AC pipe with current PVC pipe. Other water improvements that may warrant consideration if development occurs are the looping of water mains to strengthen the distribution system and relocation of the PRB to better service future development. The summary diagram shows the approximate locations of key physical improvements, including proposed improvements to the well field, the existing well field located here, implementation of the Landsville-Nanaimo Water Agreement, development of the proposed future 2-cell reservoir located here, and recommended water main upgrade projects, which are the lines shown in red. The summary also shows approximate potential extension of water mains throughout the community to service existing and potential future connections. The dashed lines are the water mains that are currently not existing but would potentially be needed to extend community water to those areas. So the Water Master Plan process has provided an opportunity to analyze current constraints about community water provision, better understand existing desires for community water provision, and outline potential directions for managing and enhancing Landsville's water infrastructure and water use. It is important to recognize that this is a high-level living document. It outlines what we know today, what we might foresee in the future, so that directions can be pursued, but it also sets up steps for monitoring, reviewing, and updating these directions as the community moves into its future. Thank you for your attention. I know that was a lot of information. If there are general questions, I'd be happy to provide responses now. But as mentioned before, any detailed questions, you could direct them to Mr. Spears, and the team will prepare responses for an updated future council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, questions, comments this time? Councillor Hain?
I have a little of both. Thank you very much for your presentation. I don't even know where to begin. I have so much stuff, but I won't go on all about it. But basically, thank you for finally tying together the OCP process, the water master plan, and development. Because the number of times you said potential development, it is clear that this process is all interlinked and it's all about the same thing. It's all about potential development. That was very clear, I think, for the number of times I counted potential. So my question comes back to, who are we doing this for? Using your own numbers, and I'll ask just a few questions and then I'll come back. You said 2/3 of the residents are on water and 1/3 isn't. It's been broken down into 7 areas. Only 3 areas are remotely considering it water. Of the 2 key areas, Clark area, 81% said they want no water or no significant development for water. And the Wind said 59% said they want no water and no significant development to get water. The interesting thing for me is, in Clark, I don't know if anyone's done the math, but we're talking about a $200 savings per year if they give up their community to development. This, in the Winds, we're talking about a $600 savings per year if they give up their community development. So my question is, and I have others and I'll come back, so we're talking $4,000 over 20 years for Clark if they give up for development. Your report doesn't spend a lot of time on other ways that we could have satisfied the water needs for those areas. Most of them don't want development, and yet and I'll get into that, but we're going whole hog on the development for justifying this water master plan for these residents that clearly say they don't want it.
Okay, so is that a question?
It is a question. Why are we not looking at other ways to get them water? It's a water master plan. Why are we not looking at other ways to get them water without it being through gross, extensive development?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think one of the options that the plan wanted to explore was the range of options and put down realistic costs for what it would cost in the absence of development as well as with development. There's many options for pursuing funding for those types of areas. In order for us to calculate community desires, we need to present to them, here's the scenario where this is how much it would cost if your community or if your neighborhood wanted to go ahead and service your neighborhood. So through the water master plan, what we wanted to do is present those range of options and get feedback on what the community wanted. I don't think the intent of the water master plan is to direct whether development should occur in those areas or not. It's to analyze what it would take to get water infrastructure servicing to those areas so that decisions can be made on when and how that water infrastructure is going to be developed.
Just a quick follow-up. But your recommendation is recommending through development we get water to Clark, and yet they're saying they don't want it, and the benefit is minor.
I actually think that is maybe a misinterpretation. So for Clark, it recommends that the water extension consider going ahead to the existing neighborhood in the absence of development. So it would consider potential phasing based on option B, which would be extension to existing parcels only, no significant new development, which is consistent with what the 51% of respondents to the survey replied.
Can't see your map. Okay,
Good. Okay. Further comments, questions? Councillor Colcroft?
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I think, as you know, this is my background, so I'm always critical, but it was very clear and very concise, very well done. I do have some questions and comments, etc. As noted by all my pink flags, but those I will email you in due time. I just wanted to compliment you on a very thorough presentation. Great.
Thank you.
Councillor Gisbert.
Considering we have a large number of persons here today, and there's another very important item on the agenda, I'd like to make the following motion. that individual councillors supply their questions and comments in writing to land art consultants as well as to the other council members and staff regarding this report.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? Second by Councillor Swain. Actually, I just have a question, Councillor Geselbart. Would these questions and responses become public in a public meeting, be part of an agenda in the future, recognizing in terms of transparency, one of the key parts is having such discussions in public meetings?
I don't see why not, but I think so that the individual councillors can sharpen their pencil in terms of the questions and comments, share them with staff and with other council members, and certainly make it public. I think that would be appropriate, and it would streamline this process a bit.
Okay, so discussion on the motion. Councillor Ham?
I won't be supporting the motion. I believe it's an attempt to stifle discussion. It's an attempt by certain members of council to not let the public hear about the concerns by certain councillors. And I won't support it when it's a blocking of transparency and accountability.
Yes, sir. Councillor Swain. Councillor Olson?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of that either. Certainly some of the more technical questions I can see putting in writing, but I've generally found that a dissatisfying experience, so I prefer to ask the questions verbally when all the appropriate players are here. So if anything, I prefer to see another discussion happen when possibly the Director of Public Works is here and perhaps the engineer. But for myself, I have some very generic questions that I think can be addressed tonight. Mr. Reed's here as well, who's been involved in the OCP side. There is some linkage there, so I'd like to ask some questions tonight. Thanks.
Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Councillor Geselbart, opposed? Councillor Swain, Councillor Hain, Councillor Folclough, Councillor Colson, Councillor Neary, and Mayor Hain, motion defeated. Okay, further discussions, questions, comments in relation to it? Councillor Colson?
Thank you. So, comment number one, fire protection. We keep seeing that come up. Can we please put some economics to that? When you look at the average savings for a person on their insurance with a fire hydrant there, it's $300 a year, give or take. It's going to cost magnitudes larger to get water there just for fire protection. So let's please put some economics with that. Another general question regarding the reservoirs. The reservoir information contained in this draft report is different than what we saw at the open house at the end of June. I ask for a brief general explanation as to why.
I can do my best. And one of the components of that is just continuing evolution of the directions, considering what the best way to physically service all of the water areas are. Ultimately, the recommendation that's included in the draft is considered because it would be considered the most effective way to service the areas that are proposed for water servicing extension based on the current engineering.
So follow up then through to staff. We learned at the last council meeting that the district has now taken on something with a reservoir. Can I get some general information on what that is? Is it this dual zone reservoir we see here on page 113?
Your Worship, through the council, I believe the answer to Councillor Colson's question relates to the foothills development and discussions we've had with them with respect to the works required for their project. As noted, there is a call it intermediate reservoir on the property, which provides us the ability to ultimately service the upper Landsville pressure zone. And so we're currently engaged with them on looking at designing and constructing that component of the system.
So are we constructing a reservoir for Lanceville, or a reservoir for the foothills, or both?
The reservoir ultimately services the community of Lanceville. There are certain components that the applicant is required to provide. And so effectively, trying to capitalize on economies of scale, they will pay for their share as per required to service the project, and the District of Lanceville will pay for its share.
So I'm confused then. So there's two zones, or two chambers. One chamber will service the upper pressure zone. One chamber will service the middle pressure zone. Wellfield water goes to the middle pressure zone. Nanaimo water goes to the upper pressure zone. One of those chambers will service part of the foothills development, if the foothills is paying for part of the reservoir for their requirement, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Well, it's probably a question that we should wait for the Public Works Director to answer. But effectively, the idea is that both chambers are going to be designed to service the community of Lanceville. So one chamber services Upper Lanceville, the other chamber would be looking at the middle pressure zone, is my understanding of it.
So it's your term, the community of Lanceville, that's really throwing me off. Can you be more specific, right? It's part of the foothills.
We are getting into infrastructure discussion, which is Mr. Spears, by the way. I appreciate the attempt by Mr. Linshu in that respect. When it comes to the interconnection of the system that's required on the part of even foothills, foothills would not be an isolated system. There would be connections between the system. Whether or not the water goes to foothills is a different question. So, just recognizing the technical nature of it, if staff is all right, I just kind of refer that to Mr. Spears. Is that all right? Okay, so if you can detail. Thanks.
So ultimately where I'm concerned with this is this reservoir is currently underway in some fashion that we don't know about, or council doesn't know about. What are the design criteria? So if there's two chambers, one chamber servicing the middle pressure zone, none of those people have had a local service area or anything of any level of detail to determine how many connections there will be, which we need to know to determine the size of the chamber being sized.
Okay, so I don't believe you're really asking for the exact size of the chamber. I think what you're asking is why are we progressing on projects like this when we haven't decided really what the plan is?
In general terms, yes.
Yeah. Any comment?
I think it's worth waiting for Director of Public Works to come back and answer that question, because we are getting
If I might suggest to council, I do realize that this is late July and usually we don't have any meetings until September again. It may be worthy of having or scheduling a special committee of the whole meeting where we can get into that with the appropriate technical people here and have a more fulsome discussion of it in order to provide a rounded response overall. Be a public meeting, people attending, that sort of aspect. Just a suggestion. Councillor Coco?
Thank you. Through you to consultant here. I guess the one thing that really jumped out at me that surprised me when I first read the report here is where it states that the Water Master Plan would look at supplying water to unserviced areas within the water service area versus anybody in Lanceville who might want or need water. I had thought that the process was to go out to the whole community and find out who wants it, who needs it, and go through an exercise to see who is willing to pay for it, which is, in general, which is what's been done. And the map does cover almost all of Lanceville in one way, shape, or form. But just as an example, we did have a resident recently wrote in who lives on Ald's Road on the high side. He looked at the map and seen that in proposing for Clark Drive area to service the lower side of the road, but not the higher side of the road. And I'm just concerned that people like that, who apparently he has a water issue, serious water issue, are being left out of the process. So
I think that's a fair point, and collecting that type of information and questions, I think, is helpful to the process. One thing that the water master plan and the existing policy, I believe, does allow that if there is a connection outside the water service area that does have a identified water quality problem, that can be addressed on a case-by-case basis to ensure that there's not a health hazard in the community. So there is a way to address that, but collecting information from people that might, if there is interest or desire to consider changes to the water service area, that would be a good feedback to get at this stage.
If I might kind of follow along with that, and it's a question to Mr. Limshu, recognizing that you're part of the OCP process. The water service area and the sewer service area is defined within the OCP. Has there been any discussion on the part of the OCP committee about amending or adjusting the water service area?
The only reference to amending the water service area relates to requests for land use changes. So council is aware that we did receive letters from a number of property owners requesting that the community consider changing the land use designation. And certainly through the discussions at committee level, there was a recognition that in order to accommodate that, we'd be looking at amending not only the water service area, but more likely the sewer service area for some of those folks. I think the reality is that under the current OCP, effectively it does identify a large range of parcels, which has been presented in one of the slides earlier. And certainly those areas, the land use designation for those areas do match the provision of water that's subject to.
Okay, so the only discussions that have occurred are direct, specific property development-oriented changes in the water service area versus broad-based community discussion?
That's correct.
Okay. And recognizing the consultants and staff and all that are driven by the OCP, if the water service area says, here's the line, you plan to the line. Fair comment?
That's a fair comment right now.
Further council discussion. Councillor, was there any further, Councillor Cole? No. Councillor Hain?
Just 3 points. Just on that point, basically kind of direct sourced individuals got to provide input. I think we need to put it to everyone. If we're going to offer it to a few, we need to hear from everybody on water opportunities. Just 2 questions I have, and then I'll wait for our committee meeting. But one thing I'm taking away from all of this presentation is with changing our water standards and based on how many residents that are on wells actually want water, we actually have enough water right now to service those people without City of Nanaimo water. So I find it interesting that we're not pursuing that first. I think that's the direction we should be going, because that to me is a slam dunk. People in Clark, Fernmar, they could be having water here within the year. So I don't understand why we're not going that way instead of this bigger plan. And then my other main question is, recognizing the #1 goal of the residents of this community is to maintain a semi-rural community. We signed a letter with the City of Nanaimo saying we were only going to provide water to Upper Lanceville. That's all we said. It's in bold, it's underlined, and now we're talking about upper lower pressure zones. So that's all changed. So one question is, how did we end up there? And then 2, we told them we were only going to do the upper pressure zone. But I see now in this document on page 111, we're now changing our pressure zone where it's located so we can bring in big development from lower Lanceville. Does the City of Nanaimo know we're doing that? I think we need to be genuine and honest about what we're doing and where we're taking their water. So my question is how did we end up from water just to upper Lanceville to now being an upper lower and now pretty much being everywhere in the community? And on a funny note, as a resident pointed out to me, at the water open house meeting in 2014, a resident stood up and said, we should just do whatever we want and ask for forgiveness later. And now when you actually read this, that's kind of what we're saying we're going to do.
All right, Councillor Hain. Those are legal questions, policy questions, not water master plan questions itself, not to the consultant.
But they're in the plan, and they're going to go, and I'll speak to density, what the implications are for density in the village core.
They may be in the plan, however, I do not believe it's the consultant's role to have interpreted the Nanaimo water agreement or otherwise. That would have been done separately.
So just to follow up, whose idea was it then to change the pressure reducing valve from further up on Harvey now down to here? So we can have the core now in the upper pressure zone. Where did that come from?
Maybe if I could, is there a technical reason why that would shift?
I don't, so the engineer would be the person to respond to that question. I can't answer that particular one.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion, comment on this? Councillor Colson.
I'll skip that one. A very general one that affects the overall tone of this document is on page 110, section 1.4, pursue identification of a new groundwater source. That section says the water budget models suggest there may be insufficient long-term water supply to fulfill potential long-term growth of the OCP update due to limited existing groundwater supply and limitations of the Lancel-Nanaimo Water Agreement. So my comment there is, and the circle is complete. So we've got a target growth rate right now in the current OCP that is about 5 times larger than what the majority of residents supported in the first survey. So here we are now trying to obtain water on a scale that's well above residents' desires. It's poor planning. And you know, I heard justifications given that controlling growth rate doesn't belong in the OCP, amenities will control it, but here we are now trying to obtain amenities to meet that target growth rate. It's just baffling. Actually, I'll make one comment on page 111, the looping through future development. It's section 5.2, there's talk of looping system. Yeah, that's a great ideal. I don't know if it's actually practical though, given that we're now establishing 3 separate pressure zones in order to keep the water from mixing with landfill water. Mixing is going to be very interesting to see how we accommodate that.
Thank you. Further questions, comments? I've got a few comments. Some of them are detailed stuff, like for example, when it comes to the calculations involved with the development and figuring out what it would cost residents if development occurred. I've asked for the calculations 3 weeks ago and I still haven't seen the detail behind it. So I'm going to reiterate in an email that question. The water service area. You know, when it comes to the aspect, it's not something I would consider with a great deal of input from the residents affected or residents involved, but we are shooting for a blue line on a map. And when it comes to some of those residents from the survey, it becomes clear that they are not willing to sacrifice the nature of their community or the nature of their neighborhood for water. And so maybe possibly it's a change of the blue line on the map may solve some of the shortcomings of the plans. The dual water reservoir, I admit, I'm very surprised by the number of comments about a 2-cell reservoir in the report. The discussion I had with a staff member last week says Coors was looking at it, wasn't sure if it was possible, yet here it is all the way through the report. I'm a little bit disappointed by that. The consideration of an amount of information for operating costs, it's great to talk capital, but you got to keep it running, and that's going to affect taxes on residents. And one of the things I do find interesting is the interpretation of various parties of the survey numbers. There are those people that grab the B and the C and they say, see, people want water, let's move ahead. There are other people that focus on the A and say, look how many people don't want it. When I read it, and I'm entitled to read it the way I would interpret it compared to other people, when you look at the combination of the A's and the B's, what becomes evident to me from my viewpoint is that people aren't willing to sacrifice their neighborhood for the cost savings of going from little or no development to development. Councillor Haim alluded to it before. It depends on whether you take the lower part of the range or the upper part of the range. The cost difference over 20 years for a resident on Clark Drive, by accepting a higher level of development, the cost savings is $3,000. I would suggest that people would not sacrifice the nature of their neighborhood for $3,000 over 20 years. The winds, Certainly when it came to public meetings, some of the people that were greatly interested in water to the winds, when you mention the cost to them, they say, I'm not going to pay that. The costs that are in here don't even include the $5,912 to the city of Nanaimo, if Nanaimo is connected. It does not include the cost to the individual resident of taking it to the street, to the household. The winds cost in this over 20 years, the cost difference is about $23,000. It becomes somewhat more significant in terms of the consideration of accepting development. However, having said that, the people that either don't want water or will only accept water with no development is 59%. So kind of going back to that water service area, maybe that's part of our problem, is that we are trying to solve a problem that, to the extent of it, possibly doesn't exist. And so we are aiming for this solution when some of the data kind of indicates that we should be aiming for this solution. And that would potentially change the options and choices. So, I look forward to the discussion at the committee of the whole if we can. But thank you for your presentation. Councillor Coco?
Yeah, just building up on some of those previous comments, I agree. When I look at this and talk to people from Bayview, 54% right off the bat said no, and it's so far out there, it's a long ways off from a waterline perspective. And similarly, in the Winds Estate area, wasn't very well received there. And once again, they don't seem to have the density to make it economically viable. So, looking at an option that eliminates those long shots, I think makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Any further comments, questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation and your time. Just a question to staff with regards to the possibility of scheduling a committee of the whole. Could we share information with regards to potential vacations in that? And there'd be a public announcement, public information if we call a special committee of the whole meeting?
We're going to.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on the agenda. The official community plan review. Same company, different person. So this is a status update for information for council and the public.
Your Worship of Council, pleasure to be here. I'm David Reed. I'm with Lonarts, where Jan and I are partners in business. And again, I apologize. We're overwhelming everyone with information tonight. It's just because it's the beginning of recess for council, and I wanted to use the time tonight. I'll take at least a half an hour, but I'll try and keep it to that, to update you on deliberations from the OCP Review Select Committee. So we're at the point where Janice showed you, we're at the point of starting to come to some draft recommendations on the OCP, and that's heavily influenced by the OCP Review Committee as well as all the public input we received today. I'll, at the end slide, deal with the details of the process, but we are looking at trying to move towards a draft which is specific enough for everyone to review it in detail. At this point, we're still in principle. These were the 10 meetings of the OCP Select Review Committee to date. It's been lively discussion. I don't think anyone would ever accuse them of rubber stamping what the consultants think. To their credit, the discussion really has been thorough and intelligent. The OCP Review Committee is one body, but then there's all the engagement we've had all the way through the whole process. And like the consultants, the OCP Review Committee is looking at everything we've heard from everyone. There are no voices that aren't important. This was from some of the early engagement, the word shard of what people love about Landsville, and it is about community, the character of Landsville. Its semi-rural character certainly comes through. Nature close by, and its uniqueness, especially being unique in the sense of it's not North Nanaimo. In terms of what people would change, obviously you see village core and sewer and services show up in there. So maybe surprisingly, many people were concerned about how slow change is, and there was interest in water and sewer service, Certainly revitalization of the village is a common theme. We were surprised, frankly, by the interest in more variety in housing choice. We didn't expect to hear that. Some people don't want sidewalks at all. Other people did mention it, but a little bit more amenity. The opportunity to move from large properties to smaller ones, again, more choice. And then implementing environmental protection were some of the themes. We also went through kitchen table events. There were 13 of them. They were small, generally in the range of 6 to a dozen people. And themes from those were consistent with the early input. Certainly, everyone's interested in the village being thriving and successful. People do want to be inclusive of all ages and types. I'm probably the most common Lesvillian, and that's a pretty narrow demographic, so people are aware that as the community ages, we lose opportunities. There was a lot of discussion about seniors' care, and at the kitchen table meetings, again, somewhat surprisingly, there's definitely interest in seniors' care in the village. There was surprising interest in the Owen Road area, although not universal by any means. And the secondary suites, there was a lot of interest everywhere, but also a recognition and a need for very strong regulations and guidelines around parking and appearance and so on to make sure that that's a benefit, not a problem. The main focus of community engagement was a community-wide survey. It was mailed to everyone. It had a very high response rate for this type of survey, especially a big one and a complex one. And its accuracy is statistically accurate to about 4%, plus or minus. So don't get hung up on 1%, right? It's not that accurate. But we do, I will hit on some of the high points as I go through here. And then finally, we did have a June 28th open house. There was about 110 that came. We had 45 responses. And interestingly, it seems that people that responded were maybe the two extremes, at least more extreme than we saw in the community-wide survey. We had about a third, it ranges on each question, but say 35 to 45% that appear resistant to development, not all development, but to lot sizes that are smaller than a half acre. And a surprisingly equal number, about 35 to 45%, that were interested in relatively unrestricted development. Let the marketplace decide. And then between those two extremes are nuanced comments about quality and character. And I think I always hesitate, and council should read these comments, and we will put them on the website. We're just finalizing. I encourage you to read all the comments, because I'll never properly interpret it. But between the two, I think it's fair to say that there is consensus on a range of housing choice in the village area, but as you go further from the village, the consensus gets more and more weak. There's more and more controversy. Certainly, in the Winds area, there is a very split opinion about both water and about growth in the Winds area. We have gone through the comments as consultants very carefully, and the OCP review committee has been doing the same because they're the most recent. But we take all the comments through the whole process and look at them together. So things that we can take from that, certainly there's huge amounts or huge aspects of the existing OCP, the 2005 one, that remain valid. I think that the structure and the main policies and the main direction, I don't see a need for change. The change is in the details. We also find, as we talk to the public, that there's not a full understanding of what's in the existing OCP, and that's not just us, that's common everywhere. So as we were talking to people on the 28th, we tried to show in green text what is existing policy that we say carry forward, in blue what is a refinement, and in gold or brown, brand new policy, and that's in these slides. When you look at the vision and goals, we've seen nothing more than wordsmithing. The vision still applies, and you can see the support there, very strong support. The 59% is support and 34% is support with minor refinements. Very, very small number, 7% that don't support it. Even in the don't support, if you read the comments, you will find sometimes they don't support it because they don't agree, sometimes they don't support it because they want to change. So you need to look at the comments and the statistics. But foreshore to foothills, the village-like commercial center, the semi-rural character, the improvement in housing choice, the expanded infrastructure, and environmentally friendly community with certainly trees and green space and a walking community is what we want. I can say that because I live here. In terms of the goals, again, we suggest the 7 existing goals remain. The ones in green are, I think, fine as they stand. The ones in blue, I highlight them in blue because there have been a focus of both the consultant's attention and the OCP committee on what might we refine there around housing choice. The existing OCP talks about comprehensive development plans for Ware Road, meaning just the Ware Road property, not all of the village, and Foothills. Foothills was done in terms of comprehensive development, so we changed that to, we're suggesting calling them special area plans rather than comprehensive development plans, partly because they're about more than just development. They're about green space and trail networks and other things as well. And we talk about key residential infill areas, and I'll go on as we go through. And then the community infrastructure side is yes, related to that, and the water master plan is the key part of that. The mobility goals still apply. This is just for information, and I'll say to council, this proposal, or sorry, this slideshow, we expect going up on the website, so a lot of the information is here so that people can read it and understand it all. So I'm not verbally telling you everything that's on these slides is designed for the web. The existing lot sizes in landfill is just to give people a more clear picture of what exists. And the point of it is the variety. There's a huge variety in lot size, and that's, I think, a lot of what people like. In the Winds area, it's half acre to 1 acre. In Winchelsea, a quarter acre to just over that, some half acre. Down in Peterson and Dickinson, there's a lot of lots that are smaller than a quarter acre, rather. And that's the variety is the point. So getting into proposals, as council is aware, there have been several letters received from individual landowners that were requesting consideration of changes to land use designations. The land use designations is a key element of the OCP. It's not zoning, it's higher level. It's basically suggesting the key ones in the existing OCP are rural residential, estate residential, and residential with some industrial. And those areas are, there was a long discussion at the OCP committee as to whether to, how to respond to the people that had requested changes. And there was seemed like a crescendo coming of more people requesting changes. And the wish of the committee was that rather than dealing with that through maybe a semi-open door of a committee, that we encourage people like that, if they do wish to come forward, to go through a formal OCP amendment process, which would involve coming forward and ideally community engagement, making sure everyone's very aware of it, and going through the process in a more thorough way. And in that context, then, there's from the committee, there's no recommendations for changes to land use designations. The circle is the village area, and there is a change in area there. And I'll comment on as I go through. We looked at making the area for a special area plan of the village slightly larger than was in the 2005 OCP. These are the special planning areas that are still on the table, and they are the village. I'll show you in a minute the change in the village in terms of area, but there are multiple different subzones or sub-areas in the village. And it also includes Clark Drive property, we call this the Hayes property, which is Hayes Place, Ronald Road property, and the G property, as well as some areas that are large parcels with subdivision potential that are currently in the residential land use designation. There are also a couple of potential farm cluster areas shown here. They may be special planning areas, but they're a lower level of attention. Oh, Janet, I went to hit the wrong button. Here we go. Got it. So what does special planning areas mean? Essentially, they're a bridge between the high-level policies of an official community plan and the more technical zoning discussion. When we look at these special areas, the reason they're chosen is that they're generally large properties. They have a lot of subdivision potential. They have existing land use designation and zoning that will allow them to develop. And they are potentially areas that would contribute to infrastructure development in the community. They'll will, I'm sure, be accused of promoting development in these areas, and that's not the point. The point is to plan it carefully, whatever happens. The kinds of things we've been talking about in a special planning area process, it's like a neighborhood plan. So certainly full engagement with the immediate neighbors, as well as, of course, the landowners and developers, district staff. A much more detailed process that is more neighborhood intensive is a key element. What we don't want is for council to be put in a position of someone coming forward with a zoning proposal without talking to the neighbors and putting council in a position of sort of being arbiter between the neighbors and the broader community. We think that there is a need to have the difficult conversations within the neighborhood. At the same time, one can't expect 100% agreement or more than a sense of where the majorities are, both in the neighborhood and across the community. It's the right time for some of the technical studies, like environmental, geotechnical, archaeological, traffic, how much traffic would actually be generated, views, trees, and of course infrastructure. And even the existing OCP mentions fiscal impact, so what are the impacts on taxes? There may be options looked at, and that's the time to look at the layout of housing types and the proposed subdivision. So what would the subdivision pattern be like? Where would be roads, but where would be green space, where would be greenways, where would be trails and cycle connections, and as well how would infrastructure be managed. And then in some cases, if there's multiple family or intensive residential, there may be neighborhood-specific design guidelines or special placemaking elements. And finally, and most importantly, what's the phasing of development? Where might it start? What order would it go in? And how might there be mitigation of impacts like construction impacts, noise impacts? So what comes from that for these special areas would be recommendations to council. Everything is council's decision to make in the end. Everything else is advisory. But if the neighborhood plan would look at specifics for a neighborhood of amount, location, and range of housing types and parcel sizes, the amount and location of green space and trails, design guidelines, and phase development agreements. We mentioned there should be informal public engagement, so several public review events. To adopt this would likely be a schedule to the official community plan, or an appendix if you like. And so that means a public hearing, a formal public hearing to adopt it. And after that then, that would provide the platform for detailed zoning changes and a phased development subdivision agreement. The zoning would have public hearings again and council approval. After the zonings, then subdivision is a technical process, but we're suggesting that anything that is smaller than a certain lot size, and say 550 square meters, somewhere in there, we would call intensive residential, and that would trigger a development permit. So that means design drawings, landscape drawings, so that one can know what the quality will be. So the issue is quality control. And then that already is required for multiple family, industrial, commercial, and institutional projects. And again, development permit and landfill comes to council. One of the most difficult issues that I think the whole community is grappling with, including the review committee and ourselves, is the wish to manage growth. This is the survey results, and so it's also very true that the initial survey asked what is the rate of growth you'd like to see in Lanceville, and the answer from 60% of people was 1%. That's 15 units in a year, and there must be close to that going on with housing redevelopment, but it's extraordinarily slow. And we take that as on the record. In the community-wide survey, there was questions asked about either status quo as in no growth was 18%, maintaining the 2005 OCP was 27%, and update planning directions and defining the development areas, which is more of a growth strategy, was 56%. Now, I mentioned, you're looking at plus or minus 4%, so I don't want to overweight this. That was the results. How they're interpreted will be up to individuals. Certainly, though, prioritizing the village came through. The semi-rural character, the small town came through. keep it slow. Always concerned about traffic with any change, and there was a discussion about tax implications. So what can an OCP do about that community wish? And I must admit, I scratched my head. An OCP typically looks at growth over 10 to 20 years. It must, by the municipal act, have allowances for growth, but how much is up to the community. It's usually updated every 5 years. It's very uncommon for pace of growth to be written into an OCP. In fact, I'm open to seeing examples. I haven't seen one. What does affect pace of growth directly is decisions by council. And so one of the suggestions we're saying, if we're going to, for the special planning areas, which are some of the major growth areas, if we're going to do special plans for those, then perhaps council's choice, at least on where it puts its resources of time and staff time and money, can set an order that you would like to see. Applicants may come in and challenge that order, and that's probably to be expected, but at least council can lay out its priorities. And of course, the timing and approval or not of a rezoning is a powerful tool. So development can proceed without rezonings, but if it's going to proceed at a higher density, it needs rezonings. And so council's choices about how fast those are is a governor. The Nanaimo Land-Scale Water Agreement is also a governor. The idea of 50 units a year in that agreement also puts a restriction on the pace of growth in Upper Land-Scale only. So this was, given that sense, this was the draft priorities written in, so we suggested the village area. That seemed to be everybody's focus, is let's see some change there, some improvement to business conditions and get our housing choice there. And then Ware Road, Clark Drive, so this area over here, did seem to be a little less concerned about growth, or a little bit stronger consensus than, for instance, over in the Winds here, where there is clearly not consensus. So we said that area first, the Winds third, and then East Lansdale, not necessarily the Care Precinct, but that area fourth, and then finally the waterfront, or the sea level rise and other things, number 5. There was a discussion about whether there should be other areas. Council is aware the golf course has indicated interest in, we hope not losing the golf course, but in some changes. And then there were other areas up in here as well, where there's a whole neighborhood would like some changes. It may be that applicants will come forward. My own suggestion is that if they do, multi-property special planning areas would be the ideal way to do it. In other words, if it's a whole neighborhood and you're looking at changing the neighborhood, then one should look at changing or planning for the entire neighborhood rather than property by property. There is a lot in the existing OCP, the 2005 OCP on density bonus, and this is the definition of density bonus in that OCP. Essentially, it says if there is a benefit to the community or an amenity to the community, then there might be a provision of additional units on a given site in exchange for that amenity, that amenity, and that is very much allowed by the Municipal Act. Here's where a lot of people aren't reading necessarily the existing OCP and may not be thoroughly familiar, and it is also highly technical. But without going into all details, base density is 5 units per hectare, which is half an acre. There is a density bonus allowed to a minimum lot size of 1/3 of an acre in the general residential areas. When you actually go through the math and the calculations, it turns out that once you allow for 20% park, which you like, in a road, you would not get any more units than 1/3 of an acre. So our conclusion is that actually the existing density bonus wording doesn't work. It doesn't provide any incentive, whether by design or by mistake, we're not sure, but there is no incentive here. In the village, however, there is, and the numbers are different. So the base density for Village West is 7.5 units per hectare. For the central area here is 10. There's a density bonus in both of 3.5 units per hectare, provided there's 20% parks dedication. And that leads to a range in west of 11 units per hectare, and in the center area here, 13.5. And that does work. That wording is effective. And so I'll only hit the high points here. This is proposed refinements to density bonusing. There's a lot the same. The parkland and trail dedication ones here are the same in principle as is in the existing OCP. We have made them a little less generous. We've dropped how many units you get down a little bit in general residential. It was, I think, 6.5, and we've dropped 10%, 1 unit per 10% dedication. Sorry. We haven't changed the density bonus in the village. It's 1 unit per hectare per 4.25% of dedication. We have added one for ESA dedication, and this one isn't well understood. It would have before been handled, so say you have a creek ravine, Blood Creek ravine or Narson Creek ravine. Before that would have been handled as park green space. It's been brought up to our attention that yes, but that's not usable land, so why would you give a lot of units per hectare for that? And so we dropped it to 1 unit per hectare for 20%. The difference is that although the municipality can require that the water course be dedicated, if you don't have a density bonus, it's likely, like along Blood Creek, that the ravine and riparian areas would be carved up to the private property, and you wouldn't have a trail. So if you want to have it in public property and a trail, then there is a reason to have a small density bonus. We've added 2 new ones for discussion. We did discuss density bonus for community infrastructure, only for exceptionally valuable community infrastructure, and the OCP Review Committee suggested to drop that one and replace it with a bonus for cluster development, which I'll explain in a minute, and also one for innovation. Both of those are relatively small. They're up to 1 unit per hectare, but they are trying to build on quality. Yes, I think that's a lot. So density averaging and clustering looks at, instead of having just a conventional subdivision, then one has some multiple family or smaller lots and a lot of green space in common. And so there already is encouragement for a range of lot sizes, and in fact for clustering in the green text, this starts to add some more detail around that and pushes it a little more. The subdivision bylaw now allows you to average, say an average was a half-acre lot to go down to a third-acre lot. We're suggesting you extend that range even more. And the reason for that is to try and get not cookie cutter. People keep saying not cookie cutter. So we want to have not subdivisions that are all the same size, but we want to have areas that are a wide range of different parcel choices and even a small amount of multiple family. And so this wording does that. So we don't want cookie cutter like this. We do want, no, these are multiple family, but we do want a range of housing choices. This is more like the village. And then, I won't go through all this now, but this does give you examples for different land use designations of how those principles would be applied. And so the way it applies in principle is the same as the existing OCP. The numbers are slightly changed. The biggest change is in adding these density bonuses for cluster and innovation, and also separating out ESA dedication from park and trail. So it's a refinement. The kinds of total numbers are similar. They are slightly higher because of the innovation and clustering ones for some of the village areas. There's one notable, and that's the village lowlands, and that is an area that is behind us here, where in the trees there was discussion about having 3 to 4 story with half of the land as dedicated green space. That's still in there. We end up with a 31 unit per hectare on that small area. I'll show you where that is in a sec. Innovation might be anything from innovative seniors communities to non-market housing like co-ops, special energy subdivisions, zero emission vehicle subdivisions, open space clusters, rainwater harvesting subdivisions, accessible like wheelchair accessible subdivisions, passive energy subdivisions, and so on. Leading edge, high quality. We did discuss perhaps a density bonus for estate residential, and it was considered, but the committee wishes to not recommend it. Again, this can be studied. This is turning those density bonus rules into examples of numbers of units. And so you can see it for some typical conditions. It's easier to understand. Something that's brand new, but is done elsewhere, is the idea of community amenity contributions. So if there is a rezoning, it's more common in many places like Ladysmith and Sydney, but started in Lower Mainland, to negotiate with the developer to suggest that there should be a charge per unit that would go towards development of parks and trails, recreation amenities, investments in infrastructure, recreation sites like improving Custom Hall, fire protection, maybe improvements in the village, entrance signage, streetscape, and the waterfront. The idea is that there will be a list of things, and although this is over and above development cost charges, it's about quality of life amenities, and we're recommending that be a part of any program going ahead. I'm going to skip over these quickly. These are changes to maps. So there was the old OCP for the village core. This is the new one. You can see the differences to add in some of these properties along Lansville Road that are affected by the area in behind, and also on Lynn Drive there. It's not that we anticipate dramatic change around those edges, but to include them in the planning process. There was discussion on the limit of the village commercial core. You can see the area here, and actually working with the committee, it's come back to be essentially the same area, although we have added in these properties, which are between the Ware Road intersection and the village now. They would certainly be long range. The village south is essentially the same area and very much the same policies. What we tried to do is be sure that whatever was in the community-wide survey is reflected in this plan. There is worry about 4-story buildings. We've cut back on the area of that, and there's policy language in here that describes what might be in the limited area where 4 stories are. Basically, the reason that it's still there is to protect the wetlands that are there, to save half of the land in green space, to have, our fear is if we have 2 stories or 3 stories, we'll have surface parking, so you end up paving the wetlands with parking. And yet we have cut back the area that would be allowed to a very small area. There's been a long discussion about how to handle seniors, and in the end, there's certainly a wish to be certain to have 100 units to 200 units in the village of community care, and then when we look at what was the potential care precinct, the wish is to keep it as a special planning area, but be not necessarily a place for assisted living or care. It might be one of the uses, but there could be other uses as well. So it's a more open land use designation. There's specifics in here of wording changes on policy that were presented on June 28th and carried forward. When we looked at the commercial core in here, some of the discussion that was happening earlier is topical. So there was a wish to include the ability to have a village in this area and to not have it just be a strip along Mansfield Road. And so that is a change brought forward by the discussion with the committee. When you look at then the specifics, these slides go through the specifics of what was the base density in the commercial core and lowlands, and what might be the building height is 2 to 4 stories stepped, and what the protected green space target is, which is 45%. And policies related to the description of it. In Village South, there's very little change from what was in the existing OCP. It was 10 units per hectare before, 20% green space, and that is the same. There is an additional unit per hectare related to innovation. In Village West, again, the same, it's a bigger area, but the same proposed density as base density in these and ultimate density in the OCP. We're up 1 more from 11 to 12, 2 stories max, 20% green space. In Upper Lansville, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail on this. We're going to talk about the Ware Road area and then the Superior Road area. Both of these, the base density right now is 5 units per hectare. It's half acre. When you look at the community-wide survey, there was 60% support across the community for some sort of development there. Although when we're going to talk in a minute about the neighborhood breakdown, and it is less supportive. And then across the community, we're looking at the base density is 5 units per hectare, again, a half acre. If all the gross densities were put forward, then you'd be looking at up to 10 units per hectare. And the range of units across all of Upper Lanceville is that, 275 to 550, a 2-story max. It used to be a 20% target for green space, and that's up to 30%. Now, if there is less green space, there will be less units, and that's something I think in the follow-on special area planning to work with the community to decide. So the 2 areas near Ware Road is Ronald Road, Clark Drive, and Hayes Place, and Superior Road is Winds East, which includes the G property. So looking first at the Ware Road area, there is the intersection on the Island Highway, and then this is Ronald here. Clark Drive sort of ends there and also ends at this end over here, and Hayes Place ends right there. In the community-wide survey, this is the local subset for Clark Drive. So there was 70% support in that for infill in the Ware Road area, but certainly at the same time maintaining a semi-rural character. So this is not the village, it's very different from the village. These are the density bonuses that would be applied to the same I've described. These are the kind of units, so you'd have 5 units per hectare base. In the Clark Drive area, there's a Bloods Creek Ravine. There's also the possibility there's a flat area that might be a neighborhood park dedication. So that would add up to 40% green space, which is very high. If you added in a cluster and innovation density bonus, then you might have up to 138 units. So the range is from 66 units if you went with the existing zoning, up to a maximum of 138. If you had just these 2, you're in the 100 range. So there's choices to make, and the thought is to leave those for, this sets the bookends, and then to leave the details of that for the special planning area process. At the G property and this area, this is splitting the Winds community. There's no question when you look at the results. And so you're looking at a don't support outright of 32%. This is a local subset, and a split of supporting with refinements or outright support. That is a split result. We are looking at suggesting applying the same density bonuses. Where the community will end up in a neighborhood plan, I'm not sure. So the base density right now the base density zoning will look at 129 units. This is using just the G property as an example. If you looked at 30% green space, including the ESA, you'd add another 63. So you're just under 200, if I believe. Yes. If you then added these 2 quality ones, you would up it potentially to 256. So the range is, if you took the green space, which clearly most of the community wants, you're looking at 192. If you got a very, very, very high quality development, you could get up to 256. I don't know where the community will land in here. They may land right down there. My point is, I think it needs to go through the process to see. I think so far what's been talked about generally is numbers. There hasn't been much discussion yet about quality and the details of what green space might be and where and what the type of development might be. There is clearly a lot of fear of small lot development, and so there needs to be development permit and much more information around that before it would be acceptable. And there is much need for very, very good buffering between the ALR and existing residents and any future development. So that one I see as a work in process. I mentioned development permit areas, so we've spent a lot of time thinking about numbers and quantity. I think it's very important to spend equal effort on quality, and that's where development permit requirements come in. There is very, very strong support for having the existing development permits and enforcing them. There are 7 now. We're suggesting an 8th, which is to maintain a buffer along the Island Highway. But a lot of the development permits, as well as about being environmental protection, are about form and character. So we're saying to avoid the kinds of things that define North Nanaimo and replace them with things that would define character that's appropriate to Lanceville. So, wrapping up, the next steps. Jana has tabled the Water Master Plan. We're suggesting to simply provide this to you for information right now on the OCP. while there's recess, we will go ahead as consultants and staff to work up a draft OCP document to incorporate what I've given you today, as well as design guidelines, which will be new. We will likely incorporate the village design guidelines, which were done in draft. So we're planning to be back to you in your council meetings in early September with the draft recommendations for the OCP to let you digest them then. There likely will be a referral for agency review. And we're looking at one more public information meeting. I'm thinking that's likely October. And so we never have a meeting unless we expect to change things. So it is a meeting to get input and to look at refinements. There is a suggestion from the OCP advisory, the select review committee, that they meet before that public information meeting. So once the draft is done, that they see it, and also after the fall information meeting. So you need the input from the public, and you consider that, and bring that back with input to council. At the end of that process, there may be something that council is ready to take to bylaw readings and public hearing and adoption. But adoption now looks to be very late 2017 or maybe early 2018. Your worship, that's a lot.
Okay.
Over to council.
Thank you. If I could just jump in. Can you go to the previous slide, please?
Yes, certainly.
So at the bottom you have OCP Advisory Committee recommends, but it's not in your next steps. Is that telling me you don't intend to take it to the OCP Committee?
It's there simply for council information. It's actually, I'm not sure it requires a resolution, but it is council's choice, I guess, whether we take it back.
Well, personally, if they haven't seen the draft, I don't want to see it, with all due respect. I might it goes to the committee first for their input before it comes to us. But
we take direction from council, certainly.
Okay. Council, questions? Councilor Hain?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for your report. A few things. First off, this last bit is very disappointing for you to be saying that, because it was made very clear to the OCP committee members that they were going to get 2 more meetings out of this. So now to be told we may not, there's stuff we didn't even get to. So that to me is very disheartening to hear that, and it taints this process again for me. So hopefully that's not the case. So that's my first point. Secondly, it's nice to have the water master plan, because now it puts context to all these density numbers we've been talking about. And the part I don't get, and this is, you can explain it to me here now, and let's just use the village core here, the lowlands. You know, we're talking about in just a little tiny area of potentially changing the density from 488 units to 620. We're talking 4-story buildings, which everything I've seen has said no, nothing greater than 2. So, you know, and I now understand where the water source is coming from. It's coming from Nanaimo. It's providing the water. So now I get the big picture of what's going on here. And I think the community needs to know that that's what's going on here. So my question is one, in all of our meetings, oh, and one other point, some of those slides did not reflect what the OCP committee said, and in particular, for example, the G property. At our last meeting, we had a consensus that we were talking 205 units, but that slide you had on there had 256 units. So I'm confused on that. So my question is what is the point of special planning areas if we're going to set out these densities that they can go to town on? We're setting out in the minds of people what they're going to get. So why even have the special planning area?
Several questions in there. Councillor Hain, through your worship. Certainly my intent in the bottom asterisk was to recommend those meetings, not to say they shouldn't happen. But I didn't think I could presume the process. The process is a change from what is laid out in our terms of reference. So it's not meant that they should happen. My recommendation is they should. As far as the lowland area, the discussion of the committee on the lowland area was whether to drop it down to 3 stories. The existing OCP in that area talks about 3 stories, not 2. But there was a discussion about whether to drop it to 3, and the majority of the committee was in favor of 4 stories because of underground parking, but with the proviso that the area was reduced essentially in half, so the number of units are in half, and that it is certainly on the basis of 50% green space and underground parking. So there would have to be a lot of quality come out of it for it to be supported. And it is a maximum. So any density bonus is a maximum. The underlying zoning remains. And in the end, it comes to the community for discussion in more detail, and it comes back to council. So the range in the OCP of types of potential density bonus and the range from the low end to the high end is honestly to be determined by the detailed process. That's the reason for the detailed process. I think that until there's a lot more detail, it's hard to judge what the best balance is. Respectfully, Councillor Hain, I looked at the last meeting too, and I'm aware that there was a discussion of a limit on the number of units of the G property. I also am aware, and it's just the way it ended up, it wasn't voted on, and so yes, there was a discussion, but there wasn't a clear decision. And there were others that were discussing other things. So to me, it's still to be determined. And, if the OCP committee comes up with a final decision at its next meeting, that's just fine. But it was not clear to me.
It's on the tape, it's okay.
Additional questions, comments? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rolla. Sure, you can make a motion at any time.
I'm going to look to staff for some help with the wording of this, but I move that the process be amended to include an OCP advisory committee meeting before and after the fall public information meeting.
I'll second that. Is that wording acceptable? Okay. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Any additional, Councillor Coulter? Councillor Paulson?
So these comments I made at the OCP committee meeting, I was at 2 meetings ago, but to me a fundamental flaw of this has been the amount of development. We've dropped a development bomb here that the plan as it's written will potentially double the size of this community within 15 to 20 years. Nowhere in the survey data did we ask that question. Residents, do you want to double the size of the community in 20 years, 15 years? We didn't do that. The question that was asked in the survey, it asked no growth and then in 0.5% increments up to 2%. Only 6% of residents wanted more than 2% per year. And yet here we are with a plan that's going to be a little over 5% equivalent growth rate per year. 15% of people said no growth. So, taking a very simplistic view, we could have presented an OCP that locked down everything to meet the no growth component. But the reality is, most people want some level of development. I fully agree with that. I voted for the 1% target, but we haven't given them that. And it troubles me to hear that, we can't put that in the OCP. To me, that seems the logical place. Official community plan. Growth rate is part of what you would plan for. And in terms of how to address, there was a proposal of council to kind of prioritize things and how it's targeted and where resources go and such. Why don't we do that in the OCP? First 5 years, you focus on the village core. Test the waters. If things are going too fast, you hold off for a few years, let things average out. If things aren't going briskly enough, based on what residents want, bring in another special planning area. But what we've done is we've taken all these special planning areas, given very generous bonusing, density, and so forth, and here we are with a potential target, I think 7,800 people was the last number I saw. So it's just immensely troubling, and I commented in the Water Master Plan part, then you bring in the other things that have to happen to support that targeted growth rate, and it goes off the rails. And we've heard it from many councillors, past and present, on, we're just meeting the OCP targets. If you get the targets wrong, so many subsequent things are faulty. So I really hope that we can do a better job with our population target with this OCP. That's all. Wish to respond? Yeah.
Thanks, Your Worship. The important thing and the difficult thing is to balance all of the inputs. And so there was the 1% input. There was also the community-wide survey where 60% people chose the larger, higher target. And there's also the wish for a broader range of housing choice as well as a vibrant village. So we take all of those and consider them and look for a balance. So it is reality, I think, that there is certainly a part of the community which wishes no growth. There's a part of the community which wishes relatively unrestrained growth. And I believe both of those parties are likely to accuse us of not listening to them. Believe me, we've heard them, but I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, and we're searching for where that middle is, and that's the purpose of the process.
Just in the comment of the the scenario ABC vote, the 60% supporting scenario C. I read that, I accept that, but there was a lot of content to contemplate in each of those scenarios. So to suggest that 60% of people that they voted for scenario C supported the target growth rate in scenario C, I think that's quite a leap of faith. They could have supporting the green space, the trails, there's probably about 14 points that were captured in each scenario. We don't know why people voted for one scenario or not. The most detailed question you had on growth rate was in that first survey. And more than 2% was the highest that was asked, and it was only 6%. And so your middle ground that you should be achieving is far below 2%. And there's results I'm pointing to the chart right here. Those are the results that support that. If we didn't like or think that those were misconstrued, ask again. But we have made a very liberal leap of faith to get to this 7,800 number, and I think that's why we're seeing all the resistance and friction that's come in on some of these comments.
Additional comments, questions? Councillor Hain?
Sorry, I just want to add to that. The one question I'm hearing clearly through everybody I talk to is who is benefiting from this increased density? Who in the community is benefiting? Because residents don't see how they're benefiting from going from 3,600 residents. And according to the water plan, I saw 8,200 in there in 20 years. So, I really think there is a disconnect. And that survey, for a lot of people, they found it overwhelming and way too much information. And if I think we ask that question again, now in the context of the density that we're proposing, we would get a totally different answer. And perhaps maybe that's what we need to do, is send out another survey to the residents saying, now that you know what the density is, how do you feel about it?
Your Worship, only partly to both comments. It's quite correct that the decision about growth is full of trade-offs. The reason that there are 8 or 10 trade-offs in the question in the survey is because it is a trade-off. It is absolutely a trade-off between public green space or my fear is we can have a low-density community that people can accept quarter-acre lots, and we have North Nanaimo with quarter-acre lots. It's just slightly larger than the lots in Nanaimo. That's one reality, and that may be agreeable. But it's not what we heard. We heard people want green space networks, they want a lot of protected green space, they want protected trees, they want trails, they want a vibrant village core, they want, some people want low-cost infrastructure, and some don't, absolutely. Those are the trade-offs, and it's a complex decision. So I challenge the idea that just a simple number is the only part of the decision. I think it is highly complex.
Thank you. I think we have to remember that we're talking about an official community plan. This is a vision for the future, and it's not going to happen exactly as planned. That's a given, because there will be changes, there will be amendments every 5 years, there may be something great that comes along in between, there'll be an application, and we'll change the OCP. we've got a community that is made up of two things: existing, fully developed neighborhoods and completely undeveloped potential neighborhoods. There's about 4 of them. And I think the current draft of the OCP goes a long way to protect those existing neighborhoods. I think really the only change that I've heard is the potential for secondary suites and carriage homes. Other than that, Winchelsea's not going to change, Lynn Road's not going to change, those subdivisions aren't going to change. Those are going to basically stay pretty much the way they are. But the community has come out and said there are a bunch of things that we do want. So how do we facilitate those? How do we do that? We only have the 4 or whatever it is larger parcels left to do that. So if we want to provide smaller houses for young families and empty nesters, they're going to have to go into those neighborhoods and the village. And while we might want to have, a certain percentage right across the community, we don't have the ability to stick those in the existing neighborhoods. So we're going to end up probably with a few more of those in the new neighborhoods than you normally would put. But that's what you're going to have to do to get the balance in the community of housing types and affordability, size, types, just personal preference, so that we can accommodate young families and empty nesters, those that live here now and want a smaller place, and those that might want to move here. But the bottom line is, nothing's going to happen on those 4 properties or 5 properties or whatever it is without an OCP amendment and a rezoning. So if the OCP gets amended, they're going to come back to council with a rezoning application. And at any time, council can turn that down for whatever reason. They don't even have to actually have a reason. They can turn down a rezoning application. But even after that, then there's also the development permit or the special planning area permit, or whatever it's referred to now, where there's going to be another public consultation process with detailed designs. The community's going to be able to see it. The community's going to be allowed to have input, and council then makes the decision. So, the OCP is the vision, and how fast that will happen depends on a lot of factors, including council decisions from now for 20 years or whatever it's going to take. But in my experience, working in local government sector where there's developments come forward and they say, yep, we're going to build this out in 20 years, it typically takes about twice as long. And, Fairwinds is a perfect example of that. That was going to be built out in 20 years. I think they're halfway through the second 20-year period now, and they're not even close to half done.
Who's acting mayor currently? Could you take over until I get control of this, please?
Okay.
Sorry, Your Worship.
Right, would be timely to do the motion to extend beyond 10 p.m.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, what was that?
At some moment before 10 p.m. we need a motion to extend beyond 10 p.m.
Well, it's 9:54, so I have a motion to extend the meeting, second by Councilor. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Councilor Gaspar opposed. Means extended. Any further discussion, Councilor Smith?
Through the chair, to Mr. Reid, sorry, I got a little bit of meeting fatigue occurring right now, but do you have any projected growth rate data with the foothills going live? And have you considered that or analyzed that?
It was, I'm going by memory. So specifically on the foothills, no, but it is a part of the overall OCP package and deliberation. There is nothing in our recommendations that would change the conditions around foothills, but to be honest, I don't believe it's been discussed at the OCP committee. And so it is a part of the overall cumulative growth in Lansville, yes, but the rate of it, no, we haven't considered what the rate would be.
Thank you.
No. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so that moves us on to public input period. Residents are allowed to speak to any issue on the agenda for up to 2 minutes. Just make the disclaimer, though, that would be excluding the public hearing that we just had several hours ago.
We take a break and stretch.
Pardon me?
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Okay, so we have a motion for a...
I'll make the motion to recess.
I'll second
Seconded.
it, just a stretch.
Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. 5-minute recess.
I know a lot of
Yeah.
I could ask everybody to take their seats. We're approaching the 5-minute review time.
Yes. All right, everyone, we'll take your seats. The generous 5 minutes, apparently. So we're up to the public input period. Anyone want to speak for up to 2 minutes on an item on the agenda? All right, so no one will move on to approval of the minutes from the July 10th, 2017 regular council meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Colclough, seconded by Councillor Gesselbrecht. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Motion passed. None opposed. Moving on to number 8, business arising from the minutes. Nothing at this time. So on to 10A bylaws, bylaw number 60.35. Recommendation subject to the public hearing input. Let's just stop there.
I'll move the council.
Yes, go ahead.
Second.
Move the recommendation that council give third reading to District of Landsville zoning bylaw number 60, 2005 amendment, bracket 7143 Gillette Road bylaw number 60.35 2017.
Moved by Councillor Colclough, seconded by Councillor Neary. Discussion. Councillor Gesselbrecht.
Yes, I want to thank everybody that spoke here tonight. Obviously, there was a difference of opinions, but it was respectful comments, civil, many interesting things. I found Mr. Blood's comment on Wiles Creek interesting, and maybe that certainly can be dealt with when and if this bylaw is approved. But it's that type of discussion that I think distinguishes Landsville from maybe some other communities, that we can sit here, disagree about things, stand up in front of our peers and say, you know, I don't like your opinion, but I'll respect it, and here's my opinion. So based on that, I think it was a very good evening tonight, whichever way the vote goes.
Councillor.
With regards to this item, it is an interesting one. Obviously, I support business in the community. I'm confused, though, by what our motive is here. This is where I'm confused. You know, we heard a comment about if we don't approve this, we're not open for business. Well, we are open for business. I'm sorry, as we've heard, most of the businesses in this community are functioning quite nicely, thank you, other than Slade. Everyone else has got occupancy and is operating. You know, I hear from residents say, well, you have to allow it because it's in the OCP. Well, you know what? Both of these zonings are in the OCP. The OCP says right now that, yes, commercial can occur and you can have one dwelling unit above that property. So that's in the OCP. So right now it does allow for residential in the community. The issue is about degree. How much residential do we want on that property is where I struggle. You know, it's not about Cruise Plus being a good business or any of that stuff. Where I get confused is we're told that they need more space for business. We need more space to operate, to put our staff to run a business. And yet the very big thing we see on this is changing our residential density from 1 to 10. How's that about business? To me, that's not about business. That to me is a bit of a red herring or a disguise about what we're really doing here. So that's where I struggle. If you said to me, I want to increase my density because I want to build my business, I'm all over that. You know, absolutely. Let's put those people in this community and let's get them to work. But that's not what this is about. That's not what this is about at all. This is about finding another way to make our properties profitable. This is another way of getting density into the core. So if that's what we're about, then let's make it about that. So this is where I get stuck. A resident put out there that this could create the commercial wall, and people scoff. And they're absolutely correct. It can create the commercial wall. If you connect enough commercial properties and you have zero setbacks, you have the commercial wall. Whether we like it or not, we have it. And the setback is 5 meters. We're going from 8 to 5. So we are limiting how much space there are off the road. So we are setting the tone for the future. We just saw in the OCP review that we're talking about 4-story buildings, just not very far from this road itself. This is setting the tone for what's going to happen in the core. So I take that and I go, well, what's our goal here? Is it really commercial or is it really residential? Is it because people can't fill their spots that they're looking to find a quick way to make their property profitable by putting in residential? Really? Is that what this is about? Because 10 to me seems like a really big number to get 10 residential units on that property. And so that's where I struggle with this. So to me, the motive is not clear. And it's not about the property owner, because property owners change, but zoning stays forever until they change it again. So this is where I get stuck. So, you know, I go back and forth on it. The other thing that is very frustrating is there has been no real community discussion on going from a CM1 zoning to a CM8. The OCP hasn't really even talked about it. So all of a sudden now we're introducing this new zoning into the community, which has really not been vetted very well through the residents. So I have concerns with that also. So right now, you know, I have a hard time supporting this motion because I agree it does set a precedent for the future. And, you know, I'm questioning it and I don't feel that there's been fair process on this.
Thank you. I don't have any motives. I'm looking at this on the face of it. And yes, I think it may set the tone for the community. And I think it's going to set a very good tone. I'm not going to dream about what somebody's ulterior motives are. I'm taking it at face value. Personally, I think it's going to be difficult to get 10 units in there, but that'll come out in the future when they come forward for approval. This is about building community. This is about revitalizing the village, whether it be businesses or residents. And I agree with earlier speakers there that a vibrant village isn't about buildings. A vibrant village is about people that work here and walk across the street, eat in the restaurant, that maybe go to the dentist here. I've been here since I first moved here in 1979, and it was a much more vibrant village in those days, I'll tell you. And it was because there were people here. And I also concur with one of the earlier speakers there that most, if not all, communities are focused on bringing people into their core so that it's not only vibrant during the day, but it's vibrant during the evening. We have a very good business in the pub going there. We have a restaurant that's very successful, et cetera, and we have the opportunity here to have other businesses that will also bring people, give people in the community something to do, a reason to come to the village. So this is going to set a precedent, and I think it's going to set a very positive one. And I'm speaking in favor. I hope that the majority of this council will support it.
Councilor Singh?
Through the chair, I've looked at this quite closely. I've crunched a lot of numbers, and what it boils down to here, we have custom zoning to meet the needs of the current business operator. This will be precedent setting. There's no doubt about it. We have a 3/4 acre property. The owners even admitted, tonight that the property is small. At this point, you can only assume that there's going to be at least up to 40 parking stalls for the current occupants to meet their commercial needs or to have parking stalls for their workers. You know, we were given conceptual drawings of what this property would look like, kind of tallied them up, and it looks like about 30 per conceptual drawing. So they're falling short on that. And then you add in the residential. So that could be another 10, possibly 20, because let's face it, people don't live on their own these days. So you could have more people looking for parking. You know, with this custom zone, I think we have the ability to build in a stipulation that deals with parking. Can this property even absorb the parking that's being asked, or not even asked for, but would likely be stuck with? With this, there's more controls for the type of housing that gets put on there. You know, we talk about, you know, wanting to have a variety of housing for people within the district, but there's nothing in there stating that it's 1 or 2 bedroom condos, maybe even townhomes, or maybe it's just going to be 10 small apartments. Who knows? It's, again, this is custom zoning. There's no minimum dwelling size. Could be a bunch of 400 or 500 square foot apartments. You know, I'd like to see something that maybe does appeal to a more vast number of people that, you know, with different housing needs, but right now I really don't know. You know, there's quite a bit on this, but, you know, and then we can't ignore the residents. Let's face it, we got a petition, and we have a significant number of people that have signed a petition not in favor of this development. Currently, it sits there as a beautiful piece of property. I don't think anybody can deny that. You throw 50 parking stalls on that lot and redevelop it, it's not going to be that. It doesn't stop the current owner from clear cutting it and covering it in gravel. However, as it sits now, it is a beautiful piece of property. It does represent the semi-rural character of this village. Thank you.
With respect to parking, I mean, right now they can park wherever they want. There's no requirement. There's no minimum, maximum. When the application is made, they're going to have to provide parking on site. And in my experience, and working in lots of developments, parking dictates development. You can look at a piece of property and say, okay, it allows for this. We could have 50 residential units in here. And I believe that you're very, very unlikely that you'd ever even get 10. So you're going to have a piece of property, it's small, as was stated, it's got a maximum parcel coverage of 50%, there's all these other requirements, and then there's parking. And parking is going to dictate it. They're not going to have 40 stalls for staff, depending on the size of the commercial building, the type of use, and then be able to add 20 more if it's not going to fit on the property. Typically what's going to happen, you start to draw it up, and you realize that you don't have enough land to do it. So you have to scale your building down until you meet the parking requirement. But right now there is no parking requirement. So there's no ability or incentive to redevelop the site so that they can park on the site. So there's an awful lot of requirements here and conditions here that are going to dictate what this looks like. And I think it's fear-mongering to show photographs of, you know, Kingsway-type buildings or talk about, you know, 60 cars or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. This is a very strict process that if the rezoning passes, they will sit down, they will be dealing with staff on figuring out how to make this development meet the requirements on that small piece of property. It's not going to be a huge building.
Well, right now, under the existing zoning, they can expand their business to provide them with the business space they need for their building, or for their business. So, you know, again, going back to the residential component is just a side piece to all of this. If we really wanted more commercial, we can get it there right now. The employees can park on the property. We don't have to have what's happening right now along the road. And the residents are justified in being fear-mongers because they're seeing what's happening right now. They live it every day. None of us live down there, so we have no idea what they go through. Just to expand on one comment made about we need people in the core, we are again sending mixed messages to the residents of this community. We're saying we need people down here, and yet we're expanding the commercial at both ends in our OCP. So here we are saying we want more people here, but we're going to allow for more commercial going further. If we really wanted more people in the core, why are we allowing these residential areas to become commercial? Just make them more mixed use or more intense residential. So again, this is more of a custom zoning that's been created, and I agree with that comment.
So, question to staff. Just confirming, it's CM1 zoning right now, which allows 40% parcel coverage and 8 meters building height.
That's correct.
And the new proposed zoning bylaw allows 50% partial coverage and 8.5 meters of height.
That's correct, but it still limits the number of stories to 2.
Right. But it brings in this residential component of up to 60%.
That's correct.
Right. Can I ask for a bit more background from staff on how that came to be? What influenced staff to propose that with this new proposed zoning?
Propose the 40% or propose the additional residential?
I guess more broadly proposed being why would we add residential to a commercial zone and how did it get to 60%?
In reviewing the current official community plan, the plan does talk about within the village commercial core area promotion of mixed-use development, and mixed-use development typically means a mix of commercial and residential. When you look at our current bylaws, it limits the residential component to 1 unit per parcel. When the applicants came forward and expressed an interest in redeveloping their site, we took a look at the OCP and what it says, so the current OCP. Also bearing in mind the fact that discussions we've had with the committee at large with respect to the new OCP, and so as presented earlier tonight, there is still a high level of interest for mixed use in the village core. What the applicants are proposing is certainly consistent with the current official community plan. And through discussions with them, and they felt that, if they're going to look at reinvesting in the property, let's look at planning the site properly, rather than doing it piecemeal. So, for example, they had the commercial development only to recognize that perhaps if there was some forethought given, they could plan appropriately to allow for commercial on the property. I think the bottom line is, they reviewed their OCP and, they feel that what's outlined in the current OCP fits in with their desires and needs with respect to the development of the site.
I'm just going to make a follow-up to that, if I may, and then I'll catch you both. So, I guess where I have trouble with, thank you, where I have trouble with this is, we heard from a couple of the, the forefathers of the prior OCP who say that, the extent to which this has been taken for residential over commercial is kind of far beyond what was envisioned. That's troubling. And then the other thing is, there's the village core plan, which had a vision. It was to be incorporated into the OCP process. And I think Mr. Reed said tonight that that's coming up to be discussed. When you look at what's proposed in the OCP plan right now, arguments could be made that it's quite different than what's in the village core plan. So, to me, we're like a rudderless ship in what we want in the village core right now. If we want to go all commercial to get more business down here, great. Where's the residential component going? If we want to go to all residential, great. To me, we're missing a good plan, and whatever it is, and I think that's what's causing some of the problems with resident feedback, lack of clarity on where we're going with this. So I'll pass it over to Councillor Hames. Hand was up.
So just for clarification from staff, the OCP says right now they're allowed 10 units of residential?
The OCP is not specific with respect to the number of units.
That's correct.
It's silent on.
That's correct.
The OCP talks about the uses in the village core area, and generally it talks about mixed use, which is what is being put on the table. So the proposed zoning is consistent with the existing OCP.
and again, all of it is consistent with the OCP because it's also vague. That's what an OCP is vague. It says mixed-use residential. It doesn't say go from 1 unit to 10 units. You see, and that's where people are struggling. How we went to such intense density.
Sorry, Mr. Lemcher, do you have a follow-up there?
Your worship, through the council, I would argue that the proposal that's on the table is consistent. And, you know, the OCP document is a visionary document. And it's not meant to be very specific in terms of identifying the number of units on each individual blocks. In fact, that's what the zoning is all about. And if you read through the zoning that's on the table, it limits the number of residential to 10 units. That's the maximum. That doesn't mean that the applicant has to build the 10 units. They could build 3, they could build 5. Councillor Colclough is quite correct. Once we sit down and we look at the details of the design with respect to parking, the square footage of the building is going to change, and they'll have to make some decisions with respect to the mix of residential versus commercial. The other limiting factor is the fact that you know, folks were concerned about it being totally residential, and we've got a clause in there that requires a minimum of 40%. But at the end of the day, that percentage mix could be 75% commercial, 25% residential. The 40% is just the bare minimum.
Councilor Gessler, did you have a comment from the lawyer? Any other discussion? Councilor Gessler?
Yes, I noticed that the mayor left here earlier, and I believe this is an important vote and that all council members should be here. And so I'm making a motion that we adjourn this particular vote to the next regular council meeting, which is in, I don't have a date, it's September the 11th.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councilor Colclough, any discussion on the motion? Councilor?
I won't be supporting it. The applicant asked for a decision tonight. This is the second time we've done this. I think let's just do it and be done with it.
Any other discussion? No. Councilor Swing?
Yeah, I've said this before.
Oh, sorry. I'm making a procedural breach here, I think. So that was essentially a motion to table, which
So
is not
your
debatable. It's not
discussion is
debatable.
relation to time and place.
Time and place.
It's a motion to refer, the motion on the floor is September 11th, 2017.
Okay.
Time and place, no.
So can you read that back for us all, sir?
The council refers the motion on the floor to the September 11th, 2017 regular council meeting.
Any discussion on time or place? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Councilor Colclough, Councilor Gesselbrecht, opposed? Councilor Swain, Councilor Haim, Councilor Neary, Councilor Coulson. So the motion on the floor is giving third reading to this bylaw. All those in favor? Councilor Colclough, Councilor Neary, Councilor Gesselbrecht, opposed? Councilor Swain, Councilor Haim, Councilor Coulson. Motion fails on tie vote.
Sorry, could you defeated again? It was
Defeated was Councilor Swain, Councilor Haim, and Councilor Coulson.
Yeah.
So given that third reading has failed, we do not need to do the adoption of the bylaw. Moves on to item B, bylaw number 143, regarding Phase 3 sewer.
I move that council give first reading to District of Mansfield Phase 3 Sanitary Sewer Collection System Local Area Service Establishment Bylaw number 143, 2017.
Sorry, if I could just ask you to go to page 133 of the agenda. Because There's a first motion that was added in after discussion with the province, and I think it didn't make it on the cover page. The motion is that council establish a 20-year term for the parcel tax for the repayment of District of Lanceville Phase 3 sanitary sewer collection system loan authorization bylaw number 144, 27.
I move that council establish a 20-year term for the parcel tax for the repayment of District of Lanceville Phase 3 sanitary sewer collection system loan authorization bylaw number 144, 2017.
Is there a seconder?
We want to do this?
Councilor Swain, seconded. Discussion? Actually, I'll ask, is there any comments from staff prior to entering discussion?
Council, within the package, there's a copy of the financial report that council received in April. And within the body of that report, it was recommended going for a 20-year term. It's a common term, I understand. And in our discussions with the province on Friday, one of the issues was ensuring that the property owners that are commenting or deciding if they're going to submit a petition against, that they have a clear understanding of the length of time that their commitment would be for if they didn't choose to pay up front. So that's where the suggestion from the province and discussion with the Director of Financial Services led to this recommendation. If you have any other questions, I can answer.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous in favor?
I move that council give first reading to District of Lanceville Phase 3 sanitary sewer collection system local area service establishment bylaw number 143, 2017.
Seconded by moved by Councilor Hain, seconded by Councilor Swain. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed?
I move that council give second reading to the District of Lanceville Phase 3 sanitary sewer collection system local area service establishment bylaw number 143, 2017.
Sorry, I'll just jump in. So that was unanimous support for the first reading. So second reading, moved by Councilor Hain, seconded by Councilor Swain. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous for.
I move that council give third reading to the District of Lanceville Phase 3 sanitary sewer collection system local area service establishment bylaw number 143, 2017.
Moved by Councilor Hain, seconded by Councilor Swain. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous for.
Do I have to read the whole thing? I just move what staff have here.
I'll second.
Moved by Councilor Hain, seconded by Councilor Swain. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous for. So that brings us on to correspondence from John Wilson, Regional District Environmental, appointment of Emergency Program Coordinator and alternates.
I'll move the recommendation.
Moved by Councilor Haines, seconded by Councilor Gesselbeck. Discussion?
Moved by me, sorry.
What did I say, sorry?
Say me.
Sorry. Moved by Councilor Colclough, seconded by Councilor Gesselbeck. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous for. So that brings up 12A, Mayor and Council verbal updates.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, prior to that, this is John Wilson. He sat through the whole meeting.
That's okay. Hi, everybody. You can carry on.
Thank you. Mayor and Council updates. Let's start with Councilor Swain.
Sorry.
No, I think you missed, Mr. Chairman, you missed part of that resolution.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I read the introduction, but Councilor Colclough made it, and Councilor Swain or Councilor Gesselbeck seconded it.
Did it include the alternate members as well?
Yeah, the whole
Okay,
yeah,
the whole
yeah.
shebang.
One motion, yeah.
So you're okay?
We're good.
Okay, thanks.
So through the chair, nothing to report from here.
Councillor Hain?
Nothing to report.
Councillor Colclough?
Nothing to report from the past, but I just want to make those that are left aware that on Monday, the 2017 Travel Journeys arrives in Lanceville at Stenos First Nation. So that's Monday. It's going to be amazing. I just recommend everybody go down and participate. It's going to be...
What time?
I don't know what time. Well, it's when they get there, but I don't know what time they're projected to be there. But obviously they're paddling because it depends on the weather.
Councillor Murray? Nothing? From Marcel, yeah, this bill on what Councillor Colclough said, yeah, apparently they're expecting about 92 canoes. So it's a big event. Yeah. Councillor Gasper?
Nothing.
Okay, on to unfinished business. 13A, UBCM convention. There's a motion in front of us.
I move that council authorize Will Gesselbrock, member of council, to attend the 2017 UBC Municipalities Convention in Vancouver.
Second, Councillor Swain. Discussion? Councillor Swain?
Yeah, just through the chair, speaking to the motion. So I am the one that's withdrawing from attending the UBCM. Just have a conflict that I can't make it now. So wish Councillor Gelsenberg all the best. Hopefully he can represent us well.
Anything else? All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous 4. On 14A, new business, economic development, strategic plan, and community branding select committee terms of reference and grant applications. So, Councillor Swing.
You gotta appoint somebody.
Sorry? Oh, we can have to appoint, yeah.
Unless we wait till we do the committees.
Well, I think through the chair, I think it would be like other appointments that we've done in the past. It'd be nice to see if there's anybody that's actually interested in this appointment.
Any other discussion? So we need a motion to have some direction on which way we want to go with this. Councillor Gesselberg?
Through the chair to staff, could perhaps staff tell us a little bit more about this? I know we discussed it several meetings ago, and what's the bottom line on this?
Through your worship, Councillor Gessenbrag, want to get the terms of reference in place. The RFP, terms of reference both for the economic development strategy and the branding process have been developed. I'm hoping to get that out probably by the end of August. I don't want to do it during August, during holidays. And I'm expecting that the committee, once struck and the consultants once hired, will be probably between 4 to 5 month commitment. And the terms of reference basically lay out the duties of the committee.
Based on that, I put my name forward.
Okay. So I move that council approves the term of reference for the economic development strategy plan, community branding select committee. Further, that council appoints Councillor Gesselbrecht to represent council on the committee, and further that council authorizes staff to advertise for the other committee representatives as outlined in the terms of reference, and further that staff provide all applications to council at a closed meeting for council's review and appointment to the select committee. Next page. Oh, it's Thursday next year. And that council authorizes staff to submit applications to the Island Coastal Economic Trust for grant funding for the Economic Development Strategy Plan and to the BC Rural Dividend Program for the Community Branding Project and for funding for a temporary economic development officer.
Seconded by Councillor Neary. Discussion. Councillor Hain?
I'm assuming, but I'm pretty sure these meetings will be open to the public, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that anyone can attend and listen to the meetings.
Councillor Swain?
Through the chair, just offer thank you to Councilor Gusper for stepping up. Thank you.
Any other discussion? For myself, I'm not sure if this will be a question to staff, but I'll just ramble on for a moment. I was quite supportive of this over a year ago. Now I'm not so sure. Back when we first talked about this, I think it came up in our strategic plan session in December 2015 or January, whenever it was, 2016. And the intent was to have an economic development strategic plan which would guide something that the development in the village, which would then roll into the OCP. And so now we've got the village core plan as part of the OCP process. That's well underway. I'm kind of struggling with what we would do with the outputs from the economic development plan at this time. I'm not going to forecast what they'll say, but there could be some pretty significant recommendations that might significantly change the path of how we envision the village core revitalization. So, unless I can get some guidance from staff on how this will now, incorporate into our processes, I'm not terribly comfortable committing 27 grand or whatever it is resident money to this exercise.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, you're correct. I think the initial concept was that the economic development strategy, can you hear it?
There.
That the economic development strategy would work into the OCP, but that's clearly not going to be the case. A lot of economic development strategies are standalone. A lot of municipalities do economic development strategies, not part of their OCP at all. And they're a separate entity that can move forward. However, if there are things that come under the economic development plan that can influence the OCP, that would be brought forward to the OCP at that time. The council would decide whether you wanted to incorporate that into particular goals. I'm not sure if this OCP is going to have goals and objectives for council at the end of the day, but those goals and objectives could be added at a later date if they actually match the process of the OCP.
Okay, and sorry, I just had a follow-up. Regarding the cost components, the $30,000 that we might get from an ICT grant, would that be just applied to the economic development strategy, or could that also be directed between the economic development strategy and the branding exercise?
No, Mr. Chairman, the $30,000 from ICT goes directly for economic development. The rural dividend program will fund for branding and will also fund for staff members for implementation of the plan. The question with the rural development fund is we don't know whether that's going to still be around or not, or fall into. It depends on the government that chooses to move forward with that.
Thank you. Councilor Bolton.
Yeah, that was part of it. So just so we're clear here, so we're talking about $82,000 in total if we don't get a grant, and 52 if we do. Those correct? 57 and 27, or 57 and 25. So there's 57 and 5. So I'm a little bit there. But basically, about $82,000 if we don't get the grant.
Yeah, our budget right now is 40 for the economic development strategy and 25 for branding.
It says here on page 155 that it's 57.5 for economic development and 25 for branding.
What page is that?
155.
That's payable.
Oh, is it?
I hope not, but I think it's 47,000, not 57,000.
So the correction is on page 155, 47,000?
My head on page, I believe it is, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's 475 and 25,000. I'll be pleased if I go back and it is 57,000.
So then, just to follow up then, so it's 72.5 if we don't get a grant.
Councillor Hay?
So just following up on that, does that mean we're not going to proceed until we know what the status of the grant is?
It's through you, Mr. Chairman, it's my intention to apply for the grant right away. Other than the rural dividend, which will be a following ticket for this one. I've always spoken to ISP and they're very supportive of us making application and getting a grant of 30,000. We'll probably hear about that within a month or two at the outside.
So will we wait till we know for sure before we go forward with this program?
Yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Unanimous for. Introduction of late items. Nothing. Notices of motion. Nothing. And brings us to public input. Similar to the beginning, anything on the agenda up to 2 minutes, excluding the public hearing topic. Nothing's on the floor. And section 18, motion to close the meeting to the public. Moved by Councillor Neary, seconded by Councillor Kolkloff. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous for.
Thanks, John.